morning. I think I can only see Hashil. You're online. Yeah, we get started. We'll do the recording so that students can follow. I don't know whether the camera is working well because it looks frozen. Yeah, the camera is frozen. Let's see if there's anything we can do. Not sure there's anything much I can do here. Right. Okay, so let me just, before I go and find some technical guide, what I have put up in the LMS, yeah, okay, is some notes, some short notes for revision for December 25, professional marks guide. Yeah, the questions which we will work through today, I think it will last us until maybe the third class. These questions are here. Let me see whether I have opened it already. Not yet. From here. Okay. So the questions are going to be the one we have in the mock exam. Yeah. As well as test number 1. Yeah. I think there is an issue with this computer not having enough RAM. That's why it's slow. And that's why the camera may be not working. So we have this question, which is, there it is. All right. So the assignment question, as well as an additional question on EMA. Yeah. After which we will move on. So the revision class is divided into, initially, we are going to review the examiner's report to identify what is it about this exam that students are not finding it, it won't be easy, but not finding it approachable enough for them to pass. So we want to resolve, trying to resolve these problems by understanding what the problems are on this exam. Yeah, and hopefully if we understand the problem, I mean, you as a student, if you understand the problems, that can help you to improve. Yeah, okay. Then we will move on to do questions, because revision class is about doing question, and the examiner's complaint has always been that students are not doing questions enough. Okay, so if you haven't done it yet, please go to the LMS and download the materials there, the notes, yeah, the professional marks, the IRC questions, at least these first 3, please download. Yeah, we'll have a look at some of the elements in the notes. The notes are divided into 3 parts. Yeah, the notes are divided into 3 parts. The first part from page 1 until page 19, page 18 are summary notes from our own notes, which we have been using for teaching this paper. Page 19 is where we will start, is a specific exam requirements and abilities. This is where we will start today. And then from page 20 are extracts of some examiner's report, which we will also be looking at in the morning to identify today the problems that students are having with this paper. Okay, so I'm going to go and look for someone who knows how to resolve this camera issue. Yeah, or maybe what I'll do first, let me try to stop it and restart it. Yeah, it's gone completely blank now. Okay, so please download and read. Yeah, you can start reading from this page, page 19. Yeah, let me find someone who can help. Yeah, let me see whether Godfrey is here. Okay, hang on, yeah. They are coming to have a look. Prosper, you find someone? Where's the camera?
It was mechanical problem.
Where is Ian?
You just change. Change. Go to mechanical
Change my USB and will now be used. Okay, thank you. But okay, yes. Thank you. All right, so we are back and the camera is working now. So if there's any issue, yeah, those who are here, and I only see you, Hashil, so please let me know, yeah? If you're okay, then it's fine.
Okay, sir.
All right. So what we want to do, like I said, is many students complain about this paper. Yeah, the pass rate is quite low. Yeah, it is in competition, a race to the bottom of the level of pass rate between AAA and APM. Yeah, the only things they have in common is two things they have in common. They start with A, one is AAA, one is APM. And the second thing is they both have the lowest pass rate. If it's one sitting, AAA will have the lowest pass rate, followed by APM. The next sitting, APM will have the lowest pass rate, followed by AAA. But recently, I think there's been a little bit of improvement on APM. Now, things are not going to change very quickly, I believe. It's one of the reasons is that it is for many students who are coming onto the APM exam, they don't realize that the traditional way, and during class we have explained this, the traditional way of answering is not going to work here. Because if you're going to say, okay, I have learned, I've covered the syllabus, I've covered the notes my lecturer has given to me, and I'm going to use this to answer, that's correct. But using is not by repeating what you know, from the syllabus. It is about, if you read on this page here, which is page 19 of your revision notes, yeah, it is you have to use your learning to evaluate and make recommendations, Yeah, let me just rearrange this. There's a pen. To evaluate and make recommendations. So if you're going for this exam and you're saying, I'm going to use my knowledge and repeat that knowledge on the topic that is being required, it's not that you won't score any marks. You won't score more than 20% of the marks. So this is where we are having a major issue, in the sense that when students are using their knowledge by repeating it, they cannot pass. Now, the second issue that then arises is if you use your knowledge, I mean, some students say, okay, yeah, I understand that I'm supposed to apply the knowledge, but then they still fall into a trap whereby the first few paragraphs, which is not totally wrong to do again, the first few paragraphs, they start explaining the knowledge. Again, we'll give you some marks, but it won't exceed 10% of the total marks, okay? So if the total marks for this part was 10, we'll give you up to 2 for these few paragraphs. So I'm not saying don't do this, but you can do this, but you need to make sure you don't write too much in terms of the theory. So you want to introduce the topic by laying out the basic theory or the basic stuff that you think will be relevant. Fine, no problem, do it. Yeah, but please don't spend more than a few minutes on it. Since it is supposed to be knowledge that you have, you should be able to write it down very quickly. But your expectation of marks would be no more than 10% of the marks at hand, which means it won't be enough to pass. So by all means, yes, you can start with that, explaining that knowledge, but you need to keep it to a limited level. It will be easy marks, but it's easy to exceed the time that you have for doing this, and instead you don't have enough time to do the actual evaluation, the actual assessment, analysis, and recommendations. where the most marks are. In fact, in many questions, when the examiner say evaluate or assess or analyze or recommend, if you don't give any theory at all, you just apply, will give you full marks. The marks, when you look at the marking scheme, most of the time, the marks are only for the evaluation and recommendations and analysis and assessment, which means what the examiner has asked. So if it's 10 and you do only evaluation, only assessment, only analysis, and recommendation, you'll maximize your marks. So you say, but I haven't explained the theory. I have learned from those days I used to do lower level papers, or I used to do a degree program or whatever, that I need to at least explain the theory. The difference in this paper is we will give you full marks even if you don't explain the theory, because we are looking at you applying it. And we know whether the student knows the subject or the theory through the application. It's like if you say you're a mechanic, yeah, and then we give you an engine to repair, and you don't know where to start, or you don't know which tools to use to repair that engine. We know you don't know. You're not a mechanic. You understand? So you don't have to tell us the theory. The way you apply the theory, the way you use the theory to do evaluation, to do analysis, to do appraisal, we know whether you know or not. Yeah, so you don't actually have to tell us. This is what the examiner always said, knowledge is taken for granted. However, because of the fact that students have been doing so badly on this paper, even when for the full 10 marks, we only keep for evaluation or recommendation or analysis or appraisal, because a lot of students start by stating the theory. Rather than give 0, we give some marks. So those marks, 1 or 2 marks, 10% of what is at stake, is really not what the examiner wants the markers to do. It's just because students have not been realizing that they can just apply knowledge. So it's more like out of compassionate marks, out of compassion. Yeah. Well, fine. If the markers are going to be compassionate, we'll take the marks. Yeah. So I don't mind we do this. But the reality is, let's read this page. Evaluate means to appraise or assess the value of. This is the highest level of learning objective that exists in learning and is targeted to be at master's level or higher, or the top level of your professional studies or a practical kind of exam. So in other words, you are sitting for an exam that is aimed to be at the highest possible level, yeah, for written exam, yeah. And when we set an exam at level 5, which the exam is, there are 3 main requirements we always ask. And this is because we ask evaluate, assess, and recommend. Of course, we can change the word. Yeah, sometimes they will say they add appraise together with assess. Yeah, or you can change the word recommend to advise. Yeah, so we can use different words. But the main words is evaluate, assess, recommend. Now, evaluate, assess, recommend are considered level 5 in an exam requirement. In an exam, in education, when we write exam, we have 5 levels. Level 1 is very basic, then level 2, level 3, level 4. When you do a first degree at university, in your 3rd year, we'll give you mostly questions at level 3 and 4, and a little bit at level 5. When you go to a master's exam, we put the question in a way that they are at level 4 and 5. So this is what we are aiming to do at APM. So APM is a level 4 to 5 examination. We do put very little. It's rare. The examiner may ask you, or explain something, and that is a level 3. Yeah. Discuss is level 4. Evaluate, etc. is level 5. Good morning. Yeah. So what we are having is this different levels of exam that you need to be aware of. Hang on, yeah. Someone is here in class, which is always good to see someone here. Yeah, because sometimes when you are always online, yeah, you tend to feel like you're just talking to the camera. Yeah. Okay, so actually we have someone in class, which is good. What's your name? Amina. Thank you for coming. So we were discussing, we'll just recap very quickly. We got a bit delayed because the camera was not working at the beginning. Yeah. So, but anyway, it's recorded. You can always access the recording to the beginning. So what we're discussing is this particular page, you have to download it from the LMS. Yeah. So in the LMS, I have put a set of notes, revision notes, okay, and then the professional marks and the question. So the first initial questions I've copied for you, yeah, so that you have less difficulty in following what we are doing today and tomorrow, yeah. But the rest, whenever we need, you will have to download from the LMS, yeah, okay, because you know we are supposed to be paperless, yeah, and these ones I've copied from overseas quietly, and I carry in my suitcase, yeah, because I know in the first 1 or 2 classes, especially for my lower level PM, they haven't gone into the LMS at all, so I have difficulty when I start. So I made some copies for us, not many copies as you can see, a few copies on. Okay, so what I was saying is, if you open this APM IRC notes online, there are three parts in these notes. The first until page 18 is summary, very summary, short notes of what we have covered during class, but not all. Yeah. And then on page 19 is the discussion on what is a requirement for this exam. Yeah, this discussion is, a revision class is mostly aimed at an exam. Yeah, and we are aiming at doing as many questions as possible. But before we can do for this exam specifically, we need to clarify what is the examiner's expectation. Yeah, and what is making it so difficult that students are having difficulty scoring enough. And I was telling just now online that APM is in the wrong race because we are in the race to be the lowest pass rate with AAA. Yeah, so, and it's not very nice. It used to be a paper that used to be not as bad. I mean, if you look at 10 years ago, AFM and AAA was the lowest. So APM was more popular. Yeah. But now AFM has become more popular. AAA has remained in the doldrums, as we say, and APM has joined AAA. Yeah, so it's a race. If not this sitting, APM is the lowest rate, the next sitting AAA is the lowest rate. Recently, we had a little bit of improvement, but like I said, I don't know whether that improvement will remain for long. So the issue is, the main issue is students are not realizing that the marks are for you to apply the knowledge rather than repeat the knowledge. Yeah, that is the main thing. Obviously, the first problem, therefore, is the knowledge itself. If the knowledge is not there, students will tell me, so how do I apply that? Yeah. And the way to learn how to apply that knowledge is to do the past year questions. Because the knowledge of APM is not a knowledge that's like too specialized. Well, if you think about this coming from MA to PM, and then there's a bit of FM and a bit of strategy. When you merge this, the knowledge is there. But the style, the way in which you apply that knowledge is very specific in APM. And because it is so specific in APM, when the examiner is just wanting that application, and students haven't had exposure to the application, you're in difficulty. And so, if there are 10 marks, the full 10 marks are really for the evaluation and the recommendation. So there is no marks originally. And even when you look at many marking schemes, for certain questions, you find there is no marks for explaining the field. But because of the struggle we see when we see the answers, we see students like suddenly they have the knowledge, but they are not applying it. So what students tend to do is they tend to start by doing some explanation of the field. Okay, and then on this they do the evaluation, the appraisal, the whatever the question is, the assessment. So I will say, if you don't, if you think you can answer the evaluation, the assessment directly by applying your knowledge, just do it. You will still be entitled to full marks because the full marks are actually just for the evaluation or assessment or recommendation. But what has been happening over many years, when students are finding it difficult to apply, they then say, oh, I have the knowledge. I know what activity-based costing is about. I know what environmental management accounting is about. I know what output performance management model is about. Let me describe or explain the model first. Okay? And then only I will apply. So what happens then? They spend more time than they should on that description or explanation. So when the marker is looking at the marking scheme, for many questions, the marker has no marks for the theory. So technically, you write a few paragraphs, students, and basically, technically, they should get 0 because there's no marks for that. But when they finish doing the theory, you look for the application, you find only 1 or 2 more paragraphs on application. This has been happening for the past 10 years. So as a result, the examiner is allowing, now remember, this is not a good thing, is allowing the marker, I don't call it, the marking scheme doesn't have it. But if there are 10 marks for evaluation and the student did very little evaluation and did the theory, we can give up to 2 marks or 1 mark, normally 10%. So normally 1 mark, just for the theory. So I call it compassionate marks. Yeah. Out of compassion, out of reality, the students is really not answering the question. So we're giving that 1 mark, but it's not going to let you pass. So what I'm saying then is, if you feel like you want to write a little bit on the knowledge that you have, the theory, do it, but don't exceed a paragraph. Don't exceed 2 to 3 sentences. We'll give you that 1 mark, and then do your best to evaluate, do your best to assess, do your best to advise on that basis. No one is going to get a perfect answer. There's no right answer. There's no wrong answer in many cases. But if you're never going to do it, you're not going to get more than those 10% marks for the compassionate marks for the theory in any case. Unless the examiner, he himself say, explain, then you can explain. The examiner never say explain, you're not supposed to explain. So the concept is, when you apply that knowledge into the situation, the marker will know whether you have that knowledge. And I was explaining just now on camera. If you go to a mechanic and you say, I've got a problem with the engine, and you probably need to dismantle the engine or something like that, and you find that the mechanic doesn't know what tools to use to do that job, you really know he's not a mechanic. Do you understand the concept? So it's the same thing for us on APM exam. If we find that a student is not able to apply that knowledge, then of course the conclusion or the presumption is that you don't have that knowledge. You understand the thing? So the marker will know whether you have knowledge. As far as the examiners say, knowledge is taken for granted. So don't waste your time on repeating that knowledge, just apply. But like I said, there's a balance here we need to achieve. Given that the examiner has agreed that when students are writing something on theory, give 10% but no more. So I am still going to say you can start with 1 paragraph explaining the basic theory. At least if this is going to help you to get started, fine, get started in this way, get that 1 out of 10 marks. But then after that, you need to go to application. Okay. So if you look at what I'm saying here, one of the biggest questions that the examiner asks is to evaluate, which is very similar to appraise, because it says evaluate means to appraise or assess the level of. And this is the highest level of exam. Level 5, this is called a level 5 questions. There are 3 main, of course we can change the word, but the 3 main requirements when we set a level 5 exam, which is evaluate, assess, and recommend. We can change the word. We can change recommend to advise. We can add analyze together with assess. We still leave it at level 5. So level 5 exam is a master's level exam. Yeah, and it is looking at the test of application of knowledge. So your job is to demonstrate that you have the requisite knowledge, not by repeating it, but through using, and so as I use the word, applying that knowledge in a complex situation that is as close to reality as possible. The complex situation is the examiner will describe through a scenario. So your job is to try to understand the scenario, understand the evaluation, what you need to do, use that knowledge to apply it to the situation. Notice that we say apply. And the word apply that knowledge, use that knowledge, doesn't mean that we expect you to apply it all the time correctly. Because it depends on how you understand. And you can give an idea which the marker may not see on his marking scheme, which the examiner did not anticipate, but you can give that idea and then you explain the idea through your explanation of your idea, that means the why, we still give marks. Yeah, because since we're not asking you about the theory, but applying the theory, yeah, it's rare that if someone doesn't answer or doesn't care to answer properly, did not read the question, then it's wrong. Yeah, because you did not understand the question, then it's wrong. But if you understood the question and you're trying to apply, markers are given very clear, how do you call it? So instructions that please remember that the student is experiencing not an ideal situation. An exam situation is not an ideal situation. So markers are aware of that. So because markers are aware of that, when we see someone doing their best to apply that knowledge, we're not expecting a perfect answer. Even if the answer is partially addressing the issue, you will get marks. But answers that do not evaluate, do not answer the question, do not assess, do not appraise, do not recommend, do not advise, those answers are not going to get marks. So what I've been always pleading with my students is we don't get marks because of a lack of trying. Yeah, if we can move the needle to more of trying to get it there, you will be surprised, but you'll get the marks. Yeah, maybe you won't get 80 to pass, but you'll get 50 and above to pass, which is enough. Yeah, so recommend, for example, means to advise on a course of action, and the examiner may also use the words advise or suggest in the public. So majority of the marks in APM, before that we used to call it P5, are for evaluation or assessment. A review of past year papers shows that these are by far the most important exam requirements. And so in 2012, the same examiner is now the chief examiner. So he has a team. Yeah, those days, you only have mostly one person, but now there's a team. So there's more than one person writing questions. But he's still the head of the team. And so in 2012, he said, in the professional level papers, you will be required to evaluate and assess more often than describe or explain. These question words represent different levels of thinking. Describe and explain more often require you to recall your knowledge. And so basically repeat that knowledge. Whereas evaluate and assess require you to apply that knowledge to reach a judgment. So we need your judgment. Now, judgment is a big word. Students get a bit freaked out with this word. So I'm going to suggest a different word. What I want from my students is, even if you feel that, you know, I can't for sure, because most of the time you're acting as an advisor or as a consultant. So you feel like, you know, I don't have enough understanding to give a proper judgment. So I ask my students, if you cannot give me a judgment, at least what I want is give me an opinion. Give me your opinion. What do you think is a way to apply this knowledge? what do you think is a way you can recommend? What is a recommendation? If you don't go in that direction, you cannot pass this exam. So we need to hear from you. Yeah, of course, using the knowledge. Some of these advice or evaluation may not be fully relevant. So you won't get a lot of marks, or you will not get mark 4. But since you will always be able 3 or 4 evaluation points, if 2 out of the 3 can get marks, you're getting there. Yeah. But if you don't give me an opinion at all, you're not going to get there. Yeah. So I need to see your point of view. Okay. I need to see the student's point of view, the candidate's point of view. So the examiner then goes on. This is not me who writes this. I have taken this from this article. The examiner says, let me illustrate the difference by looking at evaluation. To evaluate means to judge or determine the value, the worth or quality of an option. So this is why I say, give me an opinion of what you think about whether is this performance indicator valid. Valid means, does it measure what I want to measure? You can tell me that. That's not so difficult to tell me. No, it doesn't measure what it, but then you have to tell me why, in what way it doesn't measure. Or yes, it measures, or why, in what way does it measure? This is where the knowledge will come in. By putting the why, the knowledge in relation to the scenario will tell you. If, for example, the examiner said, this company has to maximize its shareholder value or shareholder wealth. And then you say we're using NPV, which is value. We're using EVA, which is value. Then you will basically say EVA looks at shareholder value. Yeah, because it deducts the cost of capital. In that sense, maximizing EVA will lead to maximizing shareholder value. Fine. So that explanation came from the knowledge. Without the knowledge, you won't be able to explain that. But if the examiner did not say the company has to maximize shareholder value, but says the company has to maximize ROCE or return, then you won't use that point. You understand the concept here? So you're using your knowledge together with the information and scenario to put it together. So to make it sound less difficult, if the student has the knowledge, I don't see a problem. The second problem is whether you have enough practice. That's really the problem. But when you are in the exam, think of it as you taking one information from your knowledge, one information from your case, and putting it together. That's what we're asking you to do. The examiner already put all the hints in the case. And the examiner knows, if I say maximize ROCE, this is where you should go. But if I say maximize shareholder value, you should go in a different direction. So we're just looking whether the student is going in the direction where they should go based on the knowledge and practice that they have. If they don't go in the direction, then we know the student did not learn, did not apply. It's that simple. Yeah. So if that object is the performance of a company, then the answer can be expected to be descriptive. But that's very rare. To ask us to evaluate performance of a company is very rare on APM. It's mostly on PM, but based on numerical measures. But if that object is a performance system, this is the most likely. It's a performance system in terms of, for example, they give you the objectives of the company, how you call the critical success factors, or they give you a costing method that the company is using, or they give you a remuneration reward package that the company is using. And then a candidate is expected to weigh up the advantages and disadvantages of that method. Even if you don't do it fully, you look at what is good with this method. And if it's good, why it's good. And what is bad with this method, and if it's bad, why is it bad? Yeah. Sometimes, if we ask for a performance indicator, we gave you a performance indicator, and you think it's good. You tell me why it's good. You don't have to say anything more. Students find difficulty is when they know that this indicator is not good. And that's when they fail to tell me why it's not good. Yeah. An alternative is if they ask, but it's not always possible. If you think an indicator is not good, and you don't know how to explain why it's not good, then providing an alternative indicator that will do a better job can at least help you get some of the marks. Yeah. it should be noted, possibly, sorry, in comparison to make appropriate ways to other appropriate ways of doing things. Okay, so if we give you a company using absorption costing, and you think it's not good, you explain why. And then in comparison to, because there is a better way to do activity-based costing, maybe, yeah? Or we are using a traditional costing, which doesn't consider environmental costs, so you can suggest life cycle costing, which would include environmental costs. It should also be noted that weighing up the advantages and disadvantages means more than simply listing them. But a lot of times they will ask you, okay, this company wants to use EVA. Yeah, so in what context will this EVA be appropriate? Now, in the notes, in our notes as well as in the detailed notes here, I've given advantages and disadvantages. But if you're going to list these advantages, you're again repeating knowledge. And it may not be relevant. So sometimes, not sometimes, you must always avoid just repeating directly the advantages or disadvantages. Instead, you have to consider, is the advantage relevant to the situation? Then you can write it. Write that particular advantage as you have remembered it. So that part could be theory, but then you have to link to the situation. And you will find that because of time, if there are six advantages of EVA and maybe another 6 disadvantages of EVA, there is no way you're going to be able to use all. So you have to pick and choose which are the most important or relevant to the situation. And in some cases, you get questions which link to different topics. So then, because of the link to another topic, there could be an advantage which is not listed here, which could actually be relevant. And the advantage is not purely because of EVA, it could be linked to having another system of costing that makes it possible. Same thing with a disadvantage. So this is what means application of knowledge. And this is where you have to always consider whether there are other appropriate ways here, other appropriate ways of doing things. So you don't just list them, it requires a final application of judgment or your actual opinion as to what is appropriate in the given scenario. Yeah, an assessment is a very similar exercise in most circumstances. So there are 2 types of evaluation in this exam. If they say evaluate, the first one is to just evaluate or assess performance, which is very rare. So this is uncommon, so very rare. And the second one is the one that they normally ask, is to evaluate or assess a system, a technique, an information, a report, a method, an approach, a performance indicator. That is what is most common. And this is where, because you're evaluating, therefore, the knowledge is taken for granted. You have that knowledge, because without that knowledge, you cannot evaluate and will immediately know. So if you repeat the knowledge, like I said, we are willing compassionately to give around 10% of the mark, but not more. Yeah. Okay. So hopefully this puts into perspective. Okay. Now, there's a long, many pages of past year examiners report here, but not full report, just extracts to highlight some of the problems that we are seeing continuously happening. And you will see the trend from September 2016 until 2025, over 10 years, it doesn't really change. Yes, over the past 1 or 2 sittings after we have introduced professional marks, there's some new comments that are coming up. Yeah, but let me take you to some of this. Okay, so the bold part is where I want to highlight things. So what we see, one of the things we are seeing, even with students who we see are able to answer. So, and I have a number of students like that. I had a student who keep on scoring 46, 47, 48, even 49. Yeah. So I had a student who had taken the exam, and I had asked him after he had not passed it for 2 or 3 times. I said, go and do something else, like AFM or something else. And then he said, no, he's done AFM. So he doesn't want to do maybe tax, which is, if it's UK tax, it's too difficult, or AB, auditing, because he's not working in auditing. So he's sticking to this APM. And after taking the class once or twice, he's been coming for revision classes. So one of these days, he did the mock a few times. And I already know that the problem is not that he doesn't know, but his problem is he's not doing the whole exam. Yeah, so he's scoring 44, 45, because the last question on the exam, he doesn't have enough time to do. But the boy was not really able to improve on this. So one day he said to me, it was the fourth or fifth time he did not pass. He said, you know, I'm really fed up with this. So I'm going to ask them to ask ACCA to remark. Now, knowing how marking goes, I said to him, if you want to, it's going to cost you money. Like, I don't know, that time it was 60 or 70 or 75 pounds. But if you want to buy it, go ahead. At least they'll give you a report on how you perform. So you went ahead, and the report came back that he's done very well in section A. He's done so well in section A. Out of 50 marks, he was scoring, like, if I did not forget, around 32 to 33 marks. So to score 30 to 33 marks in section A, you're good. You're really good. Yeah, because that's like 65%. And then on question 2, he was scoring something like just below the pass mark, something like 13 or something like 14. So it's like he passed question 1 and question 2. Yeah, he ended up at around 45, 46, 47. I think that time was he had scored 49. That's why he asked them to review. So he had passed both question 1 and question 2. And then they said he did not do question 3, or he started question 3 and did not really put anything into it, so did not get any marks in question 3. So I said to him, you see, the problem now is you're doing too much on question 1. Question 2 is okay. How much you were in question 2 was okay. So what do you mean by I'm doing too much on question 1? And I will show you when we do questions. A lot of times when the examiner is saying to do an evaluation, let's say, of a question 1, especially examiner performance report. So they give you a performance report with 10 indicators, and then they ask you to evaluate. Now, what he was doing was he was going too long, too far, in the sense that we have 15 marks to give, and he was scoring 14 or 15 out of 15 for that part. But it was taking too long. So he's doing too much. So sometimes it is better to maybe do 2/3 of it and keep moving. The reason why I can say this is because question 1, we have 40 marks content, 10 marks professional. But in reality, we don't have 50 marks. Most of the time, we have around 60 to 62 marks in our head to give. Even the professional marks, we have 12, 13, 14 marks in our head. But we can only give you 10. So even if you do a perfect answer, and the perfect answer should be given 14 professional marks, we can only give 10. And on the other side, the content, which is 40, there's around 46, 47 marks for this content. So if you answer fully, you should get 47, and 30, you should get 60. 60 out of 50. So when a student is answering every part 1, part 2, question 1, question 1, part 2, question 1, part 3, nowadays they're listing it to 3 parts most of the time. Each of these parts, or at least 2 of these parts, have more marks available than possible. So when you're reading the question, let's say the question has divided into 3 parts, 3 projects. Let's say evaluate the company's project. They have 3 projects. One is to introduce JIT, one is to introduce TQM, and one is to introduce Kaizen. Now, each one of these, together with the performance indicators that you want to include, is worth 8 marks. Okay, or let's say 7 marks. 7 times 3 is 21, but we only have 18 marks to give. Now you understand what I'm saying? So we can't give you. So if you have done, you choose. you think GIT is very good for you, easy to explain, looking at the scenarios, the hints, or easier for you to link, do GIT fully. You come to TQM, don't do it fully. Do it maybe 3/4. You come to Kaizen, you do it half. Yeah, there are other ideas, but no need to go further. Why? Because you might still be able to score full 18 marks, over 18, because simply we don't have more marks to give you. So this is something that I made him understand. I mean, luckily he went to the next exam and he passed it. And suddenly he passed it at 65 to 70 marks. So I was rating above 50. I went from 49 to something like 66, 67. So simply because you managed now to do question 3. So this is the biggest thing that I'm seeing. Yeah, or the examiner, there's a lot of points you're going to make here. Yeah. But me, the way I see with a student who can answer, I see students who can answer. This is the one when you really feel bad, you know, as a person. You see the student, question 1 scoring 32, 30. This is a good student. They can do. And question 2 scoring 13 out of 25. So this student is now 46, 47. Yeah. And haven't done question 3 and failing, not because the student doesn't know how to do, cannot do, but because of time. This is the worst thing, because this student should not be repeating this. So the first thing, the examiner himself realized, and I've been saying, often the final question was not fully attempted, or parts of the question were not fully attempted, right? So the second issue here, he says, students should focus their minds on producing responses to the questions that were specifically asked, and not offering too much information by way of definition and descriptions, which I've already explained just now. Yeah. So go straight into the answer and try to answer it. Because I'm sharing this compassionate marks with you, it's easy to get that 1 mark compassionate out of 10. Fine. Do a short paragraph on definition, will give you 1 mark. But then as soon as you finish that first paragraph on definition, move on quickly and answer, because we can't give enough marks on definitions and descriptions. One thing that the examiner is asking students to do is ask students when answering questions. Practice also before you go to exam. You must ask yourself, am I relating the technique to the scenario? Let's say you have a technique. Let's say this is a technique of Hopwood. Yeah. I understand it, the budget constraint one. But am I relating the element of budget constraint? Am I seeing the budget constraint there? If I am able to relate the concept of budget constraints to the situation, I can see it, then yes, I'm on the right track. Then the next thing is, am I evaluating its usefulness in this specific situation? Or are you just now saying, yes, Hopwood is there is a budgeting constraint, but then is it appropriate to use budgeting or not? That's the next level, which students are not always crossing. So they have the knowledge, and you can see the knowledge is relevant. They are able to recognize it. They're able to link it, but they are not able to go 1 step further to either assess, evaluate, and recommend. And so the knowledge is taken for granted, we have said earlier. I will not explain this one again. Now, the examiners say that it is very easy to score full marks. Full marks. Yeah. This is a question that is very common. The question is to evaluate a report in question 1. The examiner said it is very easy to score full marks on evaluation of the report by ensuring that the report addresses its reader with a concise indication of the subject matter and the date of the report, an introductory paragraph which highlights the material that the report will address, subheadings for example. This is purely professional marks, the professional marks of communication. There will be 4 communication marks, which we had from before, and now it's still there. They're very easy to get. You just put a title, report title with a report, that R-E-P-O-R-T, and then you give it a title, whatever, to who from who, 1 mark. But remember, write the first line, report. Okay. Second, write an introduction. Third, have all heading and subheadings. Yeah. Fourth, make sure do the calculation in the spreadsheet, write appendix 1, and link back to the main writing in the word processor. You get 4 marks. Yeah, just for this. They actually another 2 marks for communication. Yeah, but these 4 are so easy to get. Right. So this one here, like I was saying, this was in this exam on question 2 in September 2016. It says part B was poorly done, though most candidates did pick up some marks based on definitions. And like I said, it won't be more than 10, sometimes 20%. These marks amounted to no more than 20%. Yeah, I normally say 10% because the 20% is only for some questions, but most of the time 10% we will give. Yeah, and it is also worthwhile for candidates to be aware that full marks can be awarded on most questions without definitions or explanation being given at all. Okay, so I'm not saying don't, but limit it, because you can get full marks without giving any definitions or explanations of basic concepts. Now, the reason why we are discouraging students not to give long definitions is because there's no marks. That's one thing. Yeah. But most importantly, it's because you have time pressure. Yeah, you have time pressure. It took up time which could have been more productively deployed elsewhere on the paper. Yeah. So why we say elsewhere on the paper is because if normally what we see is when students give lengthy definitions, it's because they don't know how to apply. Yeah, they don't know how to apply. So fine, give definition, but don't make it long. Still, whether you know how to apply or you don't know how to apply, you can give me a 1-paragraph definition, not exceeding 3 lines. Eh? Okay. Then you don't know how to apply. Fine, move on to the next part of the question. Move on to section B, move on to sections to question 2, question 3, rather than actually trying to continue giving definition, because there's a limit. The most, and that also is rare, is 20%. You get 10%. If it's 15 marks, we can give you 2 marks. We'll approximate. If it's 10 marks, we'll give you 1 mark. Unless, you know, the things are really going bad, then the examiner might say, okay, can give 20%. So it's better you move on to another question. So here we had said taken for granted. Yeah. Now, when we do calculation, this one is about calculation. Candidates also fail to answer all parts of the requirements. For example, where a question required specific calculations, then comment on the results. Many candidates provided very weak and superficial comments. So they did the calculations, and then they don't do the comments or no comments at all. It is essential that candidates attempt all parts of each requirement. In many instances, the discursive element allows good candidates to score marks quickly compared to numerical calculations. The examining team also always supposed to discussing results and developing these points in relation to the company detail the scenario. Now, remember one thing now. If you are in doubt that your calculations are not correct, it doesn't mean we don't give you marks for the comments. So try to do your calculations as far as you feel you can do. Let's say you know your first or second part of the calculation, first 2 lines, first 2 parts is correct, and then the third, fourth, fifth you feel is not right. So many students, then they stop there. They don't carry on to give me a final, whether the EVA is positive or negative or the ROC or whatever. And then because they did not try to complete it, they find it difficult to comment. So even if you think you're going in the wrong direction, let's say you're doing a life cycle costing for environmental management accounting, many students find it difficult. Just keep going. There will be, out of, let's say, there are 8 marks calculation, 4 will be easy. So you'll get these 4. The other 4, you made mistake, you don't get, never mind. But you put a figure and you go down to give me a cost or to give me a life cycle profit. And then you comment on it. That comment could be worth minimum 1, sometimes up to 3 to 4. And even if your answer is wrong, the comment will still be marked on the basis of your answer. We call it OFR, own figure rule. When we give this marks, we put a stamp next to it. The marker will put a stamp next to it. He'll put it OFR. OFR means own figure rule. Meaning the student is using, we are marking the comments based on the student's own figures. Yeah, it's hard to mark, it makes it life more difficult for the marker, but it's fair to the student. So students who are not aware of this, they stop it. They say, oh, I got it wrong, so I'm not going to make the comments. I'm not going. A lot of times the examiners say evaluate. The first part of the evaluation is calculation. The second part is the commenting. That's the completion of the evaluation. So if you don't make the comment, you haven't, that means basically there is no difference between you answering the question, calculate and evaluate. There's a difference. The evaluate means you calculate first and then you give me comments. But if I had asked calculate, then you don't need to give me comments. So what's happening is the student, by not making the comments, the examiner becomes unhappy because the examiner says the student is lowering the standard of the exam. He's just giving me a calculation without giving me a comment related to the calculation. So I cannot pass this kind of student because they're not rising up to the level of P5, of APM. Right? So it's very important that whatever happens, even if you feel the examiner hasn't asked for a comment, sometimes they just tell you, oh, EVA. But you have to make at least one comment. If the EVA is positive, what does it mean? If the EVA is negative, what does it mean? At least make that one line comment. Sometimes one line also we give one line. Now, this is coming from the examiner. The examiners say, when we ask to evaluate, candidates should ensure they provide clear discussion regarding both good points and bad points. So if the indicator is a good indicator, tell me the good point about it. If another indicator is not a good indicator, tell me what is bad about it. Students tend to feel like a lot of them, when it's bad, they don't explain enough. Or when it's good, they don't explain enough. Both cases. If it's a good point, you need to explain. If it's a bad point, you need to say why you think it's a bad point. Yeah? This is what I call the point. It is also essential to explain why something is good or bad. Candidates should clearly explain their logic behind such statements. This is where I get E. The technique that I ask my student to write for evaluate, assess, recommend is PER. Now, the technique I ask the students to do is coming from before 2016. But finally, in 2016, the examiner actually recommends this technique. You can see here, gives a point, explains the point, then relate. That's the R that I always ask the student to do, related to the scenario. So this is why I ask students to use a technique of P, E, and R. So give me the point, good or bad, doesn't matter. Explain, this is your opinion, come in the explain. Explain to me why you think it's a good point, why you think it's a bad point. Don't worry about whether you're right or wrong. However, if you don't have enough practice, you might not be actually telling me the why. You might only be telling me the symptom rather than the reason why it is why. That comes from practice. Yeah. And then relating to the scenario. In some cases, I tell students, if you can't relate entirely to the scenario and you want to drop in one line relating to your theory, go ahead. Relate it to the theory, because the why, sometimes why did you say it's good could be more related to theory than the scenario. So I'm going to accept that. Yeah. So it's not necessary that you always relate to the scenario, because usually a lot of them, when they're making the point, they're already relating to the scenario. Yeah. So we are going to let that go. Yeah. Now this is about calculations. You can read that. This is the point we made earlier, not answering specifically what is required. So all the other points will come, but have kind of listed it here. So you can always have a look. This one is in 2017, when the examiner became quite unhappy because students were unable to do some basic calculations. Yeah, ROC. I don't think, hopefully my students don't have a problem with that. And then the other issue is students are providing a rote-learned answer that irrelevantly describes the whole model. Yeah. Again, you're not going to get a lot of marks for description, so there's no point to do rote learning in this case for this exam. Just make sure you understand the theory more than you remember it. No, but this is not together. No. I always feel understanding, the minute the question comes up, your understanding will trump, because rote learning means you want to remember every point. Okay, like for example, for something like building blocks, there are quite a number of points. There are 6 performance dimensions, there are 3 standards and 3 for rewards. So you have to remember like 12 things. I don't mind you forgetting 1 or 2 things. Yeah, as long as you're able to use the majority of it. Yeah, that's what I want. And you understand what it is. Yeah, you still pass. Like I said, I don't need a full answer all the time. Yeah. Question 2. Remember, the examiner will always provide hints. In fact, if you start understanding the main way the examiner actually come up with a scenario, is that you're always thinking about the end of it. What I want students to cover. Okay, what points I want students to make generally. Okay, based on that, I work back and write the scenario. Okay, so let's say a scenario is written, and then there is a sort of model answer given. Now it's not over. The next thing that happens, we have what we call exam sitters. They are paid. Yeah. So someone who knows APM very well is going to be asked, here's a question, here's a scenario, write your answer. So he sits the exam. After this person sits the exam, this person will write a report. Were the questions clear? Were the hints in the scenario clear? And finally, was the time enough? So when they're putting you and telling you, okay, this is question 1, is 50 marks, we're expecting to use 1.5 hours. Do not be in doubt that, they're just, playing with you. No, 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 no. Everything has been checked and calculated, and someone has tried this, and that person has been able to do it in 1.5 hours. So that's why when the student let me know, I'm going to ask them to review. I said, you can do whatever you want, but the procedures and the policies in ACCA regarding exams are very, very good, or very strict. Yeah. So yeah, mistakes can happen. Yeah, nobody is perfect. We are human beings. But this is why these processors are there, to identify those mistakes and therefore to make it, we don't want to make something which is impossible, but yes, we know it's challenging, but we are making sure it's not impossible. Now, the next thing that happens, a person will be asked, okay, this is the model answer, or this is the answer that an exam sitter has been able to work out. Now, this is the examiner's model answer, and this is the examiner's marking scheme. Tell us, review all of this, and tell us whether the model answer in line together with the marking scheme is possible, or are there gaps given the scenario? Okay. So one of the things that comment will come back will be, yeah, I have seen the model answer, but point number 3, or the 3rd paragraph of part A, has said something about, let's say, the performance indicator, but there is insufficient evidence of that particular comment or the particular reasoning in the scenario. In other words, the hint in the scenario was not there, or was insufficient to lead to this point, therefore this point is not good. So now you got 2 choices now. The examiner has 2 choices. Either remove this from his model answer, or go and modify the scenario. That's why sometimes you read a scenario, the whole thing is going on nicely, and then suddenly at the end of one paragraph, inflation level was expected to be 15% or high inflation, let's say. or the economy is in recession. Where does this come from? The whole sentence seems to be out of place. Why he had to put this? Because one part of the answer, one point, had linked to an economic recession. And in the scenario, there was nothing suggesting there's an economic recession. So what the examiner reluctantly, because everybody is, you're criticizing me, but we know it's the correct one. It's the correct thing to do. The examiner going to add one sentence. So the hints are there. So no one is going to be able to come and say, oh, you know what? There were not enough hints to indicate to me what points I should make. There were not enough hints for me to be able to relate to the situation. There will be. It's just whether your knowledge is sufficient or your past practice is sufficient for you to identify those hints. And this is for us then, when you cannot identify the hints, then we know your knowledge is not strong. That's when the examiner will come back and say, oh, student displayed a lack of knowledge. Yeah. First step is to have a good grasp of the basic knowledge. However, at this diet, a lack of such knowledge was particularly clear. If you're not going to define, if you're not going to write the theory, how do we know you don't have the knowledge? Through the application. Yeah, because you did not use the hint, or you did not even understand the hint. Yeah. So to consider, the scenario will often provide hints of areas to consider in an answer. And good candidates use these to efficiently compile high marks in the longer parts of questions. So this one you can read. Unfortunately, answers in the form of bullet point lists of new indicators with no discussion as to their relevance or reasoning for their choice were often offered but obtained little credit or no credit at all. You can do bullet points in AFM. You cannot do bullet points in APM. We're not going to do marks because of the fact that PER. You give me a point, you don't explain, you don't relate, I cannot give you marks. Unless the examiner say list, and then you can list. Yeah, but it's rare, extremely rare. So now, okay, now we come to this concept of the E. The explanation and the relating is because we want you to tell us why. So you can see in basically the examiner say the main comment here has been answer the question asked. There are several examples where candidates answered a slightly different requirement from the one asked or simply ignored a part of the requirement. Then further down, during this June 2018, the examiner, when writing this examiner's comment, he went, what do we say? He went ballistic with the problem of students not explaining their reasoning. Any analysis should be related back to the exam's critical access. For example, this was about critical success factors. Many candidates highlighted that X is a good thing. So they say it's good, you should do it. Or it is good to have a balance of financial and non-financial measures. Now, this is nice, no problem, nothing wrong here. But without specifying why. Measuring X. Why measuring EVA, for example, would help the company achieve its aim or critical success factors. Or why a balance of financial or non-financial measures may have been useful for the company. This is a very clear and specific area where candidates should be aware that justification of comments made and application to the company's situation or what is being examined, not memorize generic comments. This is why I want you, I say, okay, you can't tell me your judgment, give me your opinion. At least when I see students giving me opinion, I know the students is trying their best to explain to me why they think this is there. And the minute you do this, somehow or other, the marker will scrape marks for you, unless it is you're completely irrelevant. Yeah. Candidates should also avoid making the same point repetitively. Some candidates tend to use the same reasoning more than once. Yeah, he's run out of ideas already. But two require a recommendation with justification and calculation using the data in Appendix 1. Candidates often ignore the recommend to consider the data in Appendix 1 or for other measures. Justified suggestions are rewarded wherever possible, but such an approach made calculation impossible as answers like this were offered without calculation. Candidates should also be aware that this is a justification that is being tested. So throughout this June 2018 examiner's comment, the examiner is highlighting that it is justification And he made it very clear. Yeah. Candidates should try to avoid giving examples of aspects such as customer satisfaction, which are unjustified in terms of how they improve already existing measures. The reasoning of making such a suggestion in the force of the justification, yeah, is what they're looking for. Yeah. So there does appear to be a perception that candidates can cite measures, they can just give performance measures like that appear to have been rote learned, such as customer satisfaction, without explanation or justification. Yeah. So the essence, he went to say, candidates should avoid this practice, as the essence of P5 is justification. That's why I say do PER. Because the E, yeah, okay, if the point is irrelevant, finish. That's the first one. But if the point is relevant, then the E is the most important, which is why. The essence of PI is justification. So you will get marks if you can justify, you can say why. So we are looking for reasons as to why candidates feel that the measures they suggest are appropriate. So without justification, you won't get marks. Now, this one we have said, don't use bullet point, and also try to avoid single sentence paragraph. Yeah, try to avoid, I mean, unless you don't have any idea, you just know the point, you don't see the reasoning behind. Okay, never mind, just leave it and move on, okay? And that one I already said, one can obtain comment marks for insights offered even if initial calculations were incorrect. I already mentioned that just now. I also mentioned you can almost always score full marks without description of a technique and solely by focusing on the assessment. So even if you don't do theory. So students who score well tend to spend very little time on description. Yeah? So minimize, I'm not saying don't, but minimize. Okay, so this is continuous. Yeah. So September 2020. Okay, this is a very interesting one. Secondly, KPIs were often suggested, but with no justification, as we have been coming to expect, or at least a justification that was not suitable at this level. For example, regarding whether the police are better at catching criminals, a suitable KPI would be the number of criminals scored as a percentage of crimes reported. This is suitable. So that means the point is a good point, as it measures whether the police are better at catching criminals. But reiterating why you're trying to measure something is not a justification. Why are you trying to measure this catching criminal is not a justification. Why did you choose this KPI? That's a reasoning that you have to give me. But not trying, why are you trying? You're trying to measure because the objective is to catch criminal. That's not the KPI reasoning. KPI reasoning should measure something that, for example, we can compare. Should measure something that allows us to achieve an objective. That is what, and in this case, being a non-profit making, it should be something that related to efficiency or effectiveness. Yeah. So by just saying what you're trying to do is not really why. Why is not what you're trying to do. What you're trying to do is different from why you're trying to do it. Yeah. So this is also very important. A KPI example listed. Thirdly, a significant number of candidates do not appear to understand what a KPI is, and instead make suggestions as to what the police should do to improve performance. For example, the police should communicate more with the local community. A KPI is a measurable value that demonstrates how effectively an organization is achieving. It's a measure. We must be able to measure it and how effectively an organization is achieving its objective. In this case, the critical success factors, not what the organization should do to achieve the objective. That one you answer in SBL. This is APM. Here, our focus is if you give us a KPI, the objective of why you're measuring this particular one and whether you can measure is what we are looking for. Yeah. If you tell us we need to communicate, there's nothing wrong, but there's no marks for it on this paper. An ideal way for candidates to have structured their answer would have been use a heading for each critical success factor and additionally explain why the critical factor had been changed Recommend the first KPI, justify the recommendation, recommended the second KPI, and justify the recommendation. Yeah. So if you just explain and then justify whatever you're saying, it's good enough. Yeah, you will get marks for these particular cases. So I'm putting this. So if you have some time, yeah, you read this to understand a bit better of what are the difficulties or what are the problems students are facing that the examiner has highlighted. Okay, let's go to the last few. Okay, time management, don't forget, we already talked about that. Okay, so from September 2022, they introduced professional skills of 20 marks in the exam, 10 marks for question 1 and 5 for each of section. Okay, so the advice on professional marks from the first exam, the examiner said for future diets, candidates should be advised to focus on the requirements of the specific parts of each question and to ensure the specific requirements are followed. In other words, answer relevant. The professional skills marks relate mostly to candidates fulfilling the question requirements in that an evaluation, for example, does not mean a list, an identification, or an explanation. If candidates can fulfill the requirement as directed in the question, the professional skill marks will show. So if a student was in doubt that the professional skills have nothing to do with how well the answer is developed, then now this is clear. If you're not answering the question, don't expect to get the professional marks. If your answers are not relevant, don't expect to get the professional marks. Because the way the professional marks are incorporated it's like the skin on top of the answer. Yeah. So if the answer is not there, the skin won't be there. You understand the concept? I mean, it's not a nice way to explain, but maybe hopefully it gets a point across. Yeah. So this is read this one also later so to understand a bit more about how those professional marks are actually being awarded. Yeah. So this is about a BPR. Again, the professional skills marks relate mostly to candidates fulfilling the question requirements. If candidates can fulfill the requirement as directed in the question, the professional skill marks will surely improve. Yeah. So it's not going to be given separately. Yeah? Performance on professional skills marks generally matched the performance on the technical marks. So if you can't answer the technical side, don't expect to get the professional marks. The candidates that fail to address the technical requirements in parts A and B fail to score well on the professional skills marks. The marking team will always find it difficult to award professional skills marks when the content does not align with the requirement or is too brief. That's another issue. Yeah, if you're too brief, you can't really judge whether this is a proper commercial acumen. You can't really judge whether there's skepticism. Skepticism is one of the most difficult marks to get. But when you're showing you're being a skeptic, you have to also explain on what basis are you being skeptic. And that's again a why. Yeah. And so that's why students don't really score very well on skepticism, because they always fail to explain why very well. Many candidates do not know the assumed knowledge of the exam that underpin APM. Again, it's a lack of knowledge. Yeah. Then we also get answers which are, they fail to do the calculations. Many candidates fail to calculate costs in Part A on an annual basis, and most provided brief or no justification of allocation of costs. In the second part of A, a large minority of candidates discuss management of costs, despite specifically being asked to discuss areas other than costs. Part B was not attempted at all. This is March, June 23, so very recent. Part B, you can see, was not attempted at all, with many only providing a very superficial discussion of the concept and its merits. Many candidates confused life cycle costing with product life cycle and discuss the latter aspect. That being said, those who did specifically answer the requirements and obviously understood or pre-scored well. So it's a matter of, have you had practice? Are you able to understand the question? If you are, you tend to score well. Okay, now this is something I had highlighted in 1 or 2 questions. Yeah, and it is that sometimes the examiner will try to lead you. There were skepticism marks available in part A, and those who scored well, this is for question 3, with the technical marks, generally criticize the variables and score the marks. So not only, again, the same point, if you answer the question well, you are also given the skepticism marks. Conversely, those candidates who misunderstood the nature of the model in the scenario generally fail to score well here. So again, the technical part is not properly answered, so automatically the professional marks are not obtained. The examining team would like to remind candidates that it is important at the professional level to not simply accept suggestions by others. In this case, the examiner, when he writes the scenario, or the examiner says, this director is suggesting this, and discuss this in answers to score skepticism mark. You can agree, but you must discuss what this guy is suggesting. This director is suggesting using EVA. In your discussion, you put the good points and the bad points. Automatically, because you did not totally agree, you also put the bad points, you'll get skepticism. Another one, which is quite likely to happen, which the examiner likes to do, is when evaluating a reward system, a bonus system, one of the directors will make comment, or one person will make comment that, oh, because the staff were not allowed to participate, so they are demotivated, that's why they cannot achieve the target. Now, the problem could be different. The problem could be that the target set is too high, and that's why they're not achieving it. And as a result, they become demotivated, not the participation automatically. Yeah, of course, participation will help to reduce the target, but it depends on the situation. You agree with it, it's fine, but you have to still explain why you agree with it, in what way, and you have to link with the fact that the targets were set at an impossible level. And because they were set at an impossible level, that's due to not having participation. So increasing participation to make the targets more challenging rather than impossible will help. Okay. So you agree, but you have explained why. We give you skepticism. You disagree, you say, no, we should not allow more participation. You don't go towards that point. You go towards the point that the company is losing money, or the company is a new startup, and therefore it is better for top management to set the direction so that we don't miss on our targets in terms of participation would kind of dilute the achievement. So now you have gone against it, but you have given a good reasoning why, which is that the company is still new. The company is a startup, or the company is experiencing financial difficulties. Yeah, and participation could make the targets too easy. Again, we will accept the point and we'll give you skepticism. So don't always be accepting, because some students just accept, they don't say why they accept. Yeah. Or some students, very few will challenge. And if you challenge, they don't say why they challenge. But anyway, students don't challenge no one. Yeah. So that's kind of making an irrelevant point here. In part C, if the candidates discuss any other issues not directly related to ethics, but did adequately relate to commercial consequences for universities, they were awarded professional marks on the commercial argument, although this was not the main focus of the requirement. So sometimes, yes, yeah, we might give you some marks, but it's going to be rare. Yeah, so don't count on it too much. The responses were, so this is now September, December 23, many responses were underdeveloped in at least one part of the question. So now this is the more recent point. Now, in the past, students, we tend to just give theory, and then they don't develop any evaluation, recommendation, nothing. Okay. And in some cases, what happens is they just don't answer. But now what we are seeing is we're seeing answers, but most of the answers are too short and they are not developed properly. Yeah? So many responses were underdeveloped in at least one part of the question. Candidates may have written a very full response for part 1, but then could have written less than half of that for part 2, even though part 2 was actually worth 1 mark more than part 2. So what has happened is that the student is doing, now on one hand, I understand. On one hand, I'm saying, don't do too much, even when you know very well, because we won't have the marks for you. On the other hand, I'm afraid now this is misunderstood. They do too little. Yeah, so this is what I'm afraid of, you know, so it's so difficult sometimes to give advice in situations like that. All right, so calculations in part were often excluded or poorly attempted. Then we have finally proximity candidates discuss the current appraisal system from the employee's perspective as opposed to whether the system was fit for purpose. So again, they have been led by the examiner in a direction and they follow that instead of really answering the question. They are not being critical. As a result of the above, professional marks, PS marks were often hard, professional skill marks were often hard to award as candidates had not adequately responded to the requirements set. Those candidates who clearly identified what the question asked for and answered appropriately scored well. Okay, so obviously, examining team now is what we are realizing now. I mean, before also the problem was there, but now in the recent 2 to 3 years, we see that the biggest problem we are seeing is that students are not practicing questions, past year questions. That is the biggest problem, yeah? So the examining team recommends candidates review past exam questions to identify how topics may be examined, but also to attempt these questions and review their own answers compared to the suggested answers, which is what I always recommend to do. And just like in a work environment, effectiveness and efficiency improve with practice. So you cannot give up, you must continue. Candidates should always practice questions on the examination conditions to improve their performance, especially in the last 1 month before exam. So we do get the feeling that candidates have knowledge, so they appear knowledgeable about the areas the questions were targeting. For question 3 is one. Although many responses were briefer again. So again, we are getting underdeveloped answers that they should have. Again, that they make good points, they don't go far enough as to explain the points well. Yeah, this tended to mean that many candidates examine or develop the areas, particularly in part A, as well as in MAT. Performance in the professional skills must reflect the performance in the technical parts. More recently, March, June 2024, again, this problem of responses were underdeveloped continues. Yeah, so this is becoming a major problem now. So now instead of getting very long, rambling answers, we're getting very short, underdeveloped answers. So the world has changed. Again, in part 2, most candidates did attain some marks, but could have scored more marks because answers were mostly underdeveloped. Yeah. The general advice on professional marks again, the professional marks are relate mostly to candidates fulfilling the question requirements. Yeah, so that one we have seen before. Again, question 2, the main shortcoming on both parts of the question was that answers were not well enough developed to score more marks. Yeah. And of course, the issue did not answer requirements, failed to address the actual requirements. That continues, that has always been the case. For September, December 24, in question 1, part 1, the issue was, apart from being underdeveloped, it says, when asked to assess if something was adequate, candidates should either state that it is adequate and then explain why it is adequate, or state that it is not adequate and consider what is potentially wrong. Yeah, we don't need anything in between. Yeah, it's either adequate or not adequate. Yeah. I think that one we okay. We always do this kind of API. No, but it's interesting. Okay, let's read. There was an evaluation question here, as usual. We get that a lot. It should be noted that a good KPI measures those areas that are important to organization. The correct way to approach this part of the requirement was to evaluate whether the KPIs were likely to achieve the stated objective. That's always the case. In the notes also I've said, in class also I've given notes on that. Many stated that KPIs were inappropriate. So that means they did not most probably meet the objective. But instead of saying that the KPI doesn't measure achievement of the objective and why, instead they say it would be hard to achieve. How do you know? That doesn't make it inappropriate. If KPIs are potentially hard to achieve, action can then be taken to help improve performance. Hard to achieve means you're commenting about the performance, not about the KPI being appropriate or not. The case of APM. So if you say, you know, APM, it's hard to achieve 50 marks It's a different problem of whether the marking system is appropriate for the exam. It's completely different. So students are, I don't know where they are going, but they are not really understanding what they are trying to achieve here. Many students are inappropriate. Hard to achieve doesn't make it inappropriate. This in itself does not make a KPI inappropriate. Some candidates spend time recommending new KPIs despite management specifically asking that this was not required. Instructions such as this are designed to help candidates avoid wasting time on answers which are not required. Professional skills is the same, I think. Okay, this is back to writing full sentences. All right, don't forget this one I mentioned before. It is worth reminding all candidates that advice is always on an own figure basis. So even if calculations are incorrect, the advice can still be awarded full marks if relevant to the candidate's numerical results. Yeah, so do not hesitate to write your comments, even when you know from every aspect of your body, every single part of your telling you this is wrong, the final number, still you make your comment. Yeah, you have to overcome. Don't be emotional in the exam. Yeah, candidates should aim to show an understanding of real life practicalities, discuss both sides, and then make any recommendations to what should happen. Most did not relate the explanations back to the situation facing local, with relevant examples. APM is an application-based exam, and although some credits are awarded for the theory, candidates should aim to maximize their marks by always applying the theory to the scenario presented. So same points here. Okay, the problem of time, given the briefness of some responses on this question, it is suspected by the examining team that candidates had left insufficient time to attempt this question. Remember, this is question number 3, I think. Section B questions here. So by the time I'm picking up is from question number 3 here. Again, the problem and back to the point that I was mentioning, if you want to give definitions or explanation, I do not stop, because I know there is very easy mark to get 1 mark in total available describing what was meant by all 3 of the terms: equity, achievability, ownership. All 3, all, not 1 for equity, 1 for achievability, 1 for ownership. No. You describe equity, achievability, ownership, all 3, you get only 1 mark. You don't describe, it's okay, you still get full marks. So the point is, this is one of the points. You get VFM. Are you going to spend a lot of time defining and explaining what is economy, efficiency? It takes too long. Equity, achievability, and ownership. You can do each one in 1 sentence, fine. Then I get my 3 sentences that I'm looking for. You still get 1 mark. Yeah. Although these definitions were awarded a mark, candidates should aim to keep definitions brief. So we are going to give you marks, but you need to use your own understanding. Am I going to be able to give the definitions brief, not exceeding 3 lines? If yes, do it. By all means, do it. We'll give you that 10%, 1 mark. If it's 20 marks question, we'll give you 2 marks. But if you feel you won't be able to, you will get carried away, then please don't do the definition. Yeah. Okay, so the last exam, March, June 25. Yeah. Candidates looking to attempt APM exam in future diets should aim to study the entire syllabus, review previous model solutions, and most importantly, take time to carefully read scenario and requirements to ensure they produce a logical and structured answer. So there's no point rushing into the answer if you haven't understood the requirement or the scenario part that you need to use. Many candidates spend time describing each benchmarking method in detail with little or no application to its suitability. So basically, you're giving me theory. It was also noted that several answers to this part was very brief. This is now our current problem nowadays, potentially indicating that this was not a well-revised topic area for some candidates. The nature of the APM examination does not lend itself to question spotting. So nobody expected benchmarking, and it is advised that candidates cover the entire syllabus before attempting the examination. The second point, candidates appear to be unclear of the meaning of a performance measure or KPI. This is very concerning at this level. For clarity, a performance indicator is something that can be measured to assess if performance is meeting a desired objective. So it's very specific. First, it's measurable. Second, it's aligned to an objective, to a critical success factor, to a strategy. However, many candidates chose to discuss actions that the company should take. So again, what you're doing is you're telling me how to operate the company. This is not this paper is about performance. What strategy you should do, how you resolve a strategic problem or a problem of a company not making money, SBL has done that. So you don't come and do it in APM. Yeah, we don't need advice on how to improve performance here, unless we specifically ask for it. Then there was ABC, ABM. This is a question that I'm trying to, currently they are not allowing us to get the question copied easily. Yeah, but during my transit, I did 5 hours transit yesterday. I was typing it one by one because I think it's a good question because students did quite badly on this one. Yeah, performance in this question overall was lower than expected. Many candidates appear to find the ABC calculation itself quite challenging. Yeah, I'm looking at the calculation yesterday, and I think the issue is not about the knowledge of doing the ABC. The issue was in this question to me was students did not understand the instructions very well. It was a bit confusing. So we will try to do this question to highlight that the marks were easy to obtain as long as you're able to understand the instructions. And then if you did not understand the instructions, you still can do it in your own way. You won't get the full marks, but you will still pass. And this is why I want to make sure that I can try to do this. And many of the comments made in Part B either related to ABC rather than ABM were very generic in nature and not directed towards the impact of ABM on specific department. So you can expect maybe not immediately this type of question, but other types of question may be related to other costing system may be coming soon and going to highlight the same issue. So we need to resolve this problem before you go for your next exam. So this may well have been due to candidates not reading the scenario in enough details. Okay, that one is as usual. Yeah, they could not find the cost driver. And then candidates should avoid ignoring explanatory reports in the notes as they often are very instructive. Okay, it was a bit long, some of the notes, but the notes were the one that actually explained how the calculation should be undertaken. Candidate responses for Part B tended to be disproportionately brief, making it difficult for them to score well. ABM is a well-established part of the syllabus and is an area that's frequently examined. So obviously you can expect this to be coming in the future as well. Candidates should be aware that requirements in different parts of the question are not dependent upon each other and can be responded to independently. So you don't always have to do the calculation first and then answer. Yeah. Majority of candidates chose in question 3. Yeah. This was about 5 forces and risk appetite. So many students, what they did, they repeated the information already supplied by the CEO. So there were no real discussion then or further discussion. There were many examples of impractical indicators being offered. The number of candidates who did not offer any performance indicator suggestions was also. And in Part B, this part of the question was done poorly. Candidates often just reworded the analysis already given of the risk appetites of the stakeholders and failed to consider that the risk appetites had already been identified and assessed. So you're repeating what the examiner has given. Majority did not know what the possible methods of decision making were, which we have learned before, maximax, maximin, and minimax regret. This is mostly in PM. And this points to a lack of, again, basic knowledge. So easy marks lost. Easy marks lost. Yes, there was a slight improvement in the marks, but still, yeah, a lot of issues. A very quick summary of the problems we've seen, yeah, is that insufficient time to answer all questions, especially the third question. That's quite clear. Secondly, answers are irrelevant because candidates do not answer the question asked. Instead, and this is always the case for people who are marking, they know already. The minute the student do not answer the question, do not understand the question, they just write all the theories they know about the topic. Yeah, because they feel they have the time. My suggestion in this particular case is to try to read a second time and to be aware that, hey, I'm doing too much of theory here. That means I'm not really understanding. Okay. If you can write the theory, you have knowledge. So go back again to the question and try to see and note down on the piece of paper they give you, what are the points you can make? If you still cannot come with any more points, just move on to another section. Yeah, no point giving more theory because there's only maximum 20 marks, 20% of the marks we can give. So if it's 10, we can maximum we can use 2. Yeah. There's no need for much theory to be used in answer because knowledge is taken for granted. Another problem, therefore, then is answers are too general. Answers are too general means the students are making points, but they're not relating it. The R is missing, relating it to the scenario. So then we know it's too generic. That's why the examiners say general. There's a partial inability to find hints or ideas from within the scenario. This is due to lack of practice. Bullet points answers are not acceptable as only full sentences are allowed. Biggest problem in answering is justification is not being given. There's no explanation. There's no why. Yeah, which is only through application of knowledge. The other part is to explain how, which is application of knowledge through examples from the scenario. Or in some cases, you can also use by linking to your theory. It's okay to do that. As long as you don't define theory much before, you can link the theory here. We will give you marks for that. Yeah, this is another kind of trick you can do. Repeating the same idea more than once. Yeah, that means using the same point or the same justification. Losing easy marks by not commenting on calculations carried out where you are asked to evaluate or assess. Example, you're asked to do EVA evaluation, you do calculation. You must follow it by comments. For example, by saying whether shareholder value has been created or destroyed. Then there is lack of knowledge to apply. We can see that more. These last 3 points are becoming more evident now. Lack of knowledge to apply. So those are students who haven't really completed a good study of the syllabus. Then this one has always been there, but it's becoming more acute now. Lack of exam question practice. People don't have time now. Answers are too brief, even for those who are not using bullet points. So even one paragraph is 1 line. So they're not using bullet point, but they give us 1 line paragraphs, which are not going to be very useful. Okay, so these are the problems. Yeah, we'll go for a quick break, and then we'll look at some of the solutions that I'm going to suggest. Yeah, and then we'll try to start looking at the first question, which is the assignment question. Is that okay? Right. So potentially around 10 minutes break, 10 to 11 minutes. 11:24 here. 11 minutes should be okay. All right, let's do that. Okay, so the solutions that I propose. Yeah, first of all, let's have so this is a September 22 exam, which I usually use for mock exam. And it's the first exam that's a set which had professional marks. So when we analyze this exam, what we see is that question 1, out of the 40 technical marks, we had 23, which is level 5. Level 5 means the evaluate, assess, recommend. Yeah, or level 5 also includes. So what it includes is the use, evaluate, assess, recommend. Sometimes they use the word analyze also. Okay, also advise and suggest. Okay, so what we saw, and basically this trend has remained the same, is we do get questions that ask to discuss or explain, which are a bit low level, or calculate simply. But it is around, here in this case, for September 20, was specifically 28 in total for the whole exam. And level 5 is around 52. So we are getting around overall not less than 50 marks, level 5. Yeah, and not more than 30 marks lower than level 5. So we're getting this kind of breakdown. So 80 technical marks. Technical marks. So 80 technical marks and 20 professional marks. Okay. So basically what we see is that if a student is going to try and aim at the minimal level, the 20 marks are the ones that we think technically are the easiest one. You should always answer them. They basically explain, discuss, calculate. Yeah, so these are the ones. Yeah, so they are basically describe, explain, calculate, comment, discuss. Okay, these 5. And these 5 are substantial, because if you get not more than 30 marks, if you can score a lot, like for example, the minimum I would expect someone to score is at least 15 out of 28, 15 out of 30. And then if the students were able to do at a certain level, maybe 23 for the level 5, if they really find it difficult, so basically failing the level 5, yeah, that will give them 38. They will need 12 marks on the professional, which is not going to be that simple to get. Because if you don't do well here on this 23 and on this 15, you won't get 12 here. But out of this 12, we know that 4 marks for communications are very easy. Yeah, so question 1 had 6 marks communication, 4 marks A&E, 2 marks skepticism, and 3 marks acumen. So they actually had available 15. You can only score 10. So scoring the 4 marks for communication is quite easy. Yeah, straightforward. And therefore, along the way, as long as you make an effort to answer the calculations and whatever questions they ask for recommendation, the next one is A&E. Yeah, analysis and evaluation, which also tend to be relatively easier than skepticism and acumen. Yeah, and therefore, if someone can score around 3 out of 4, 7, then we only need to look for a little bit from there. Yeah, so in total, this is 12 over 20. Yeah, for question 2 and 3 for section B, we don't have communication marks, so we only have A&E, skepticism, and acumen. Generally, it is around 6 to 8 marks available. Yeah, this is the maximum available, and you can only score 5 marks on a question 2, a question. Now, a slightly better result for someone who scores well, I still would think, based on what I understand, is that students who do well, especially on the calculations and the discussion, they could score 23 over 28, 23 over 30. It has happened, I've seen it. They don't do so badly for the level 5 question, they score around 35. And normally if you do well on these two, automatically your professional marks will be high. You'll get 16, that is a way to score a high mark, 74. And to score something which is not as 50 is like, you know, it's like you're playing with fire. Yeah. So if you want to be more on the confident side, still again, the lesson we see is the lower than level 5 is the way in to get the easier marks. Yeah. And then with the 4 easy marks here into this 13, and then this 26, hopefully, yeah, instead of 23, but 26. I mean, only 50% of the 52. Someone could score comfortably 57 marks and pass a paper without any issues. Yeah. So the easy marks are the ones we need to be able to target. And they are all the lower than level 5. They are some of the communication marks and some of the A&E marks. So I would believe a student should easily be able to score around 7 on the professional marks. And if they're good enough, then they get more. These are the easy ones. And then the easy ones will be at least around 15 here and maybe 23 here. Now, even in level 5 questions, there are some easy parts. For example, yeah, if you are being asked to evaluate and then you develop enough points, the first 2 points, let's say an evaluation is 10 marks. So we'd expect you to develop up to 5 points. The first 2 or 3 points are going to be the easier ones to see, easier ones to do. Yeah. And if you can just do those, you will get enough to get around 23, 24. Yeah. So without really indulging into the very difficult points, it can be passed this paper. Yeah. So these are the problems we have seen. So what we need to do is to evaluate and assess. We need to show why and how, or why and how, not in terms of how or how not. Yeah, the particular point that you made, how your point applies. But justification is the key to earning marks on APM. So whatever point you want to make, if you're not going to try to justify, say why, you're not going to get marks. The point could be correct, the marker will not give you marks for it. And that is a bit, you might feel unjust. But again, remember, the idea is dependent upon whether you understand your own idea. If you don't yourself understand you must think of yourself as a consultant, as you're going to the board of directors and telling them, this is what we should do. And then if you say why. And once, if you can convince them why, then they'll ask you how to do it. So because the paper is such a high level, if you can't say why and how, the marker is not going to give you marks, unfortunately. Yeah. We've seen that since knowledge is taken for granted, yeah, if you just want to answer the question, you don't remember the knowledge, you don't remember the theory in detail, it doesn't mean you can't answer the question. You remember, you have an understanding of it. Yeah. You can apply that understanding. Some people are like that. They can apply the understanding, but if you tell them to give word for word the theory, they don't exactly remember it word for word. They can give you their understanding of the theory. If that's your position, then don't give definition. Go straight into the answer. Just show how you are using that knowledge or your understanding of that knowledge. Nobody's going to question you, because if it's applicable, if the answer, the point you make is relevant, it answers a question, you can justify it, no marker will question your knowledge. You understand the idea? And sometimes some of these answers are very practical. I mean, you have knowledge from before, or you have practical knowledge. When you look at the scenario, you see the practicality of it, and you're answering from that practicality of it. We are giving you marks. You don't worry about that. Yeah. So don't worry about, oh, I don't know the theory, because we don't really need the theory all the time for you to answer, but we need you to understand the knowledge. If you have an understanding of the topic, you can answer. Yeah. So that must be daring. It must be daring a bit. Yeah. Otherwise, you're not going to get anywhere. On the other hand, if you feel like, oh yeah, I know this topic very well, I can give a good explanation of the theory or a good definition that I remember quite well, fine, do it. But do not exceed 2 to 3 short sentences. I'm allowing to do it because, like I'm saying, we are going to appeal to those compassionate marks to gain, and they are going to be easy marks, because if you can give the theory, it's going to be easy. But again, like I said, if you're going to exceed 2 to 3 sentences, then I don't want you to do it. Yeah, so it's a tough choice. 2 to 3 sentences, do it, but don't exceed. If you're going to get excited about it, then please don't do it. Yeah, then I would rather you just apply your knowledge straight away. Yeah. Then this can only come through practice. Scenario contain hints that you can use to answer the questions, the hints of the ideas. A lot of times, one of the reasons why the points on their own don't obtain marks is because the point could actually be coming from the scenario. Yeah, because it's an idea of the examiner tend to lead, and sometimes the leading is good. Yeah, and picking out the point to answer. Because sometimes the examiner, for example, we have seen when we do information systems question, he will say that the company has a very basic information system. They're using spreadsheet to record all the data, and all the departments are recorded data on the spreadsheet by one person. You can already see so many problems there. So he's already mentioned the problems. The points are all there. You just have to pick up and then explain why it is a problem and maybe how to resolve it. So that's why, because the points are so easily put into the case, taking that point and starting your answer and stopping at that point, the marker will say, no, we gave you the point. It was so clear in the scenario. I'm not going to give you marks for picking up from the scenario and repeating it here. Because you saw in the last few pages of comments that we've seen just now, that the examiner is quite unhappy with rewording, using the same, repeating the information already supplied. So it might fall under this. If it falls under this, then you're not getting any marks. So you have to go beyond that first, extract the point, or at least if you understand the idea, put it in your own words. So, I mean, it's a cheap way of doing it, but at least the marker will not say, okay, it's word for word. So it's like, if you put it in your own words, you must have understood the idea to some extent. And then you move on. That should be an easier way for you to convince the markers. And I'm not picking up word for word. I know the hint is there. I know the point is there, but I'm starting it, but I'm putting it in my own words. Then I'm giving you an explanation about it. Yeah, that should be easier to score marks. Yeah. And of course, the R relate to the case. When you're relating to the case, a lot of time, again, there is information in the case, sometimes in the appendices, where they give you the information. And you can use that information to then relate to the case to show where it's happening, yeah, or how it's happening. Is my answer specific enough? When you're practicing, you need to ask yourself, is my answer specific to the case, the scenario, or to avoid being too general? The marker's way of deciding whether an answer is too general is whether now over the many years, 12, 15 years that this examiner has been here, 15, 16 years now, we have had many topics being repeated, many styles of questions being repeated already over time. So if I'm asking a student to do an evaluation of a performance report, they're going to look at the KPIs and evaluate whether they meet the objectives, yeah, whether they measure the objectives. Because this question has come often, a lot of time, some students have already learned the answer. And so what happens is they pick out, especially the concept of maximizing shareholder wealth, maximizing shareholder value using EVA. It's become so many times that it becomes like repetitive. And so you find students sometimes have learned the answer and just put it in there, okay? Then the justification, you can see, is not relating to the current scenario, but relating to the scenario the student has practiced before. And this is where you have difficulty. Or they don't relate at all, meaning I can take out that particular idea, that particular paragraph, and put into another scenario for which we have the same question. So that means it's too general. So this is a judgment that the marker will decide whether it's too general or it's related to the case. So sometimes little things about mentioning the company name, yeah, relating to the specific situation, whether the problem is related to the operational side or there's an issue with the structure, which is mentioned in the scenario. So in other words, pick out those specific things about the scenario that you see and incorporate it in your answer. That will make sure, again, it's a cheap way, but at least it's a way of making it more specific. So that the marker doesn't say, ah, this is a road learned point. Yeah. Now, evaluate, assess, recommend, the main level 5 questions. Any question requiring advice or justifications, you must use the PER answer and style in any order. Yeah, which is what we have always taught. Yeah, I will come back to it. The next problem is to make sure we understand the question well. So answer the question asked. So spend a bit more time on understanding the real meaning of the question. So don't just hurry into the answer. If you need to read, because nowadays the questions are embedded in the scenario. So it's not very obvious all the time. So it's better you go back to the scenario and reread the question very well. And if you haven't understood, read the part that comes before it and read the question, the requirement, and jot down the main points, what they are looking for. Is this an evaluation? Is it an assessment? Is it a recommend? Or are they doing suggestion? Is there an explanation part of it? Is there a calculation part of it? Basically dissecting the question. So spend a bit more time on understanding the real meaning of the questions that your points are relevant. Remember, if you're supposed to give 5 ideas, develop 5 ideas, and you did not understand the question, and you answer and give 5 ideas, and they're all irrelevant, you still score 0 or maximum 1 for the theory maybe. But if you have understood the question, but you only have 2 ideas you managed to develop, you get 4 marks rather than 1. And if we give you the 1 mark for the theory, let's say you give a little bit, a 1 line or a short paragraph of 3 lines on theory, you end up with 5 out of 10. Technically, you pass, of course, at the edge. Yeah. So why you only had time to give 2 points? Maybe because you spend more time understanding the question, but then you earn more marks. So one of the things we will do is to make sure we can continuously see the question because of this embedding. So we need to take it out. So what we are going to do and suggest is copy and paste the requirement from the scenario into the word processor on top of your answer. We must make sure it's not part of the answer. So we leave a space and we will say clearly answer starts here. Because otherwise, if you leave it in between, the marker is going to cut marks on communication because you lose professional marks. Okay. So spend a bit more time on understanding the real meaning of the question so that your points are relevant. And again, we said earlier, if they say calculate, you must follow by comment. So don't forget, comment marks are very easy marks. These comment marks are usually blind marks based on OFR. Yeah, own figure rule. OFR means own figure rule. Example, if EVA is positive, it's correct. Incorrect answer is negative. So if your answer is incorrect, is negative, you will say your comment will be EVA is negative, and therefore value is being destroyed. We'll give you 1 mark. Yeah. So I call it blind marks. I call it blind marks. So do not hesitate to make comments. You did ABC calculation, a life cycle costing calculation, put the comment. Yeah. So because these comment marks are very easy. A calculation comment can be just 1 line. That's another thing. It doesn't take much time. And sometimes just with 1 sentence, just by saying that EVA is positive and therefore value has been created, you get 1 mark. Yeah. And if it is an evaluation, then you get 1 mark, which is a calculation, is sometimes accepted as a point, because a calculation of a new indicator, for example, and the R also is in 1. The calculation can be the point and the relate, especially when we get non-profit making question. When you get non-profit making question, they say, okay, evaluate using economy, efficiency, and effectiveness, and they give you a little bit of data. So now, when you suggest, for example, the economy or the efficiency, if you did not explain it, right, you only calculate it, the calculation of the efficiency is a point, because you'll put it, okay, the KPI is number of patients seen by a doctor. So you got input, output here. Input is the doctor, patient is output. Okay, so it's well made, then it's calculated. So you will get your mark because the point, the idea, is the calculation itself, and the calculation uses the data from the case, so you relate it. So the same thing can be point and relate in some case. So your only thing you need to do more is to write the E, which is what does it mean? Why are you suggesting this? Or just explanation of that KPI can be enough. Yeah. So sometimes, because there's so many different kinds of questions, sometimes the PER is very easy, like in this particular case. And therefore, when you don't do, this is a marker, then when they're looking at it, they say, this student did not know that they could have spent a bit more time on this and do it better and score very easy marks. And they score very well. And some students do very well on these questions. And finally, for explain, describe, and discuss requirements, PER approach is optional. You don't have to do the PER. It's just why I say it's optional. It's just that in some cases, especially when they say explain and discuss, it's in relation to a specific situation. So when it's in relation to a specific situation in the exam, in the scenario, relating it to that specific part of the scenario makes the answer easier to discuss, to explain. Yeah. So not the full PER, but maybe sometimes you need to relate. Yeah. Maybe sometimes you need to do a little bit of an explanation together with the discussion. Yeah. Just to make it, just to avoid being too general, to make the answer more specific to the case. Yeah. Otherwise, there is no requirement for you, from me, to use a PER approach. And we saw it. Any calculations you must do will still earn marks for methodology. If there are mistakes, show workings, please do the calculations in the spreadsheet, especially for that ABC question that came out recently. There were a good level of marks for the calculations. And even when you were doing it wrong, the markers were willing to give us quite a number of marks. So students were getting confused because it was in section B. And secondly, so they were rushing to do it. And secondly, the explanation about how to allocate some of the marks were difficult to understand. So you had to slow down, and that slowing down, students were not able to slow down. Yeah, to slow down to do that. So that made it difficult. So back to the PER. The PER means point, explain, relate, as we have seen it just now. I changed relate to explain. I changed explain to relate, because, but if you see, even the examiner, when the examiner suggested this technique, the examiner actually put PEER, but it becomes too long. Yeah. So the examiner suggested, yeah. PE explains why something is good or bad, and then explains the logic behind such statements. Me, I don't put it to separate. I put it as one. Now, what you say why it's bad, immediately you explain further. You explain. And relating is actually, by relating to an example, to me, this relating is also explaining. It's just explaining further through an example or also through theory. Okay, so it's a good technique. Yeah. So P is the point, E is explained. That's when basically the explanation will tell us the why. So if your explanation is a bit too general and doesn't really tell the why, you know you're not doing it well. And if you're relating, it's anything which is further explanation in relation to the scenario, in the icon is leaking, or in relation to the scenario or to theory. Yeah, that will help us on the how. Evaluate, a lot of time what we're doing, we're considering the cons and pros, yeah, when they ask us, but we must use our knowledge to justify and the scenario. Assess, a lot of time, you need to consider how we can apply the specific knowledge or what we can apply the costing system. Sometimes they don't ask us to assess, they ask us to analyze. Currently, analyze has been added to mean very similar to assess. So consider how we can apply a certain approach to the case. How basically is you have to give examples. Yeah. And recommend, sometimes they use the word advise or suggest. You have to explain why. Basically, advise how to apply also can be part of it. Yeah. Of the question answer. So as we have said, it's optional for describe, explain, calculate, comment, and discuss. Normally, if you calculate, you don't have to worry about PER so much. Okay. And the last thing is, you don't always have to start with a point and then explain and relate. If you feel based on the way you're writing, you're explaining first, it's fine. Relating first, secondly, and then you're coming up to what point you're making, it's fine. Any direction. As long as I can see, the most important is for me to see the E. If I see the E and the E makes sense, I'm giving the marks. Yeah. That's really the heart of it. Yeah. Sometimes the students are not very clear about their point. They are not very, it's not very succinct. It's not very clear language. But when you look at the explanation, you kind of more or less, it leads you to what the point is. So we're still giving marks in this case. Yeah. And sometimes the E is not very clear. But then when they relate it to the situation in the case, it becomes more complete. So we are still able to give the marks. Yeah. But if we only see the point in whatever position it is, then we can't give the marks easily, because why did you give that point? In what way does it relate to the scenario? So that's why the E and the R are very important. But whichever way you do it, there's no hard and fast rule here. And you must do the P first and then the E and then the R. Yeah. So any direction that it works should be all right. Okay. So this is where we are now. Okay. So let me introduce this. Okay. And then we can start looking at some. Okay. So one of the questions that came out that I have included here. Okay, so this is our professional, I think the one you can read. This is a professional marks. Okay, communication. The easiest is the first 4 marks, like I said, report format and structure. use of heading and subheadings, and introduction. This first line, this is basically 3 marks. Report title, format, structure using headings, and introduction. This is 3 marks. Then we get 1 mark for using the spreadsheet and linking it. Then, of course, you have additional marks: style, language, and clarity, effectiveness of communication, and adherence to specific requirements as laid out in the embedded requirements. Yeah, the last one is not so evident, yeah, but we sometimes are able to give it. Analysis and evaluation is appropriate use of the data to support discussion. So you can't come up with your own ideas, your own points, your own data. You have to use the information given to you. As long as you do that, we are able to give you 1 more mark. Recognition of further analysis which could be carried out to enable a full evaluation. If there are certain things missing and you recognize, we can give you professional marks for that. And you mention what is missing. Balance appraisal to make relevant recommendations based on relevant factors. So that means you have basically considered the information we have given to you well. That's why we give you marks. And demonstrating reasoned judgment when considering key organizational manners and impacts. Again, the only way to be able to do that is you have considered the organizational matters, meaning you have considered what we have given to you. So the main point about analysis and evaluation is, have you used what we gave you in the case? If you have used what we gave you in the case, we'll give you analysis evaluation marks. Simple. So always think, am I using enough of the information given to you? Yeah. Skepticism, as we mentioned just now, is you are trying to, they lead you, they say something, you go into the scenario, you extract the information that supports the point that the examiner wants you to do. Yeah. So even if he says, oh, we must allow more participation, you can agree with him, no problem. But you must find for me information in the case that can support. That is the part where you are probing. You're probing in the sense that sometimes you're reading in between the lines, so it's not so direct. Like there was a question we normally do in class, where it's about reward system, where they say the shareholders are unhappy, okay, about the directors being given a certain level of bonus. To understand this part, we need to kind of probe why would they be unhappy. They would be unhappy if the bonus given to the directors are too high. But then, how can they give a high bonus? It's because maybe they are also on the board. Now, these were not directly said in the case, but by probing and using your knowledge and using what information is there, and in addition to logic, you can understand it and then you explain. While you're doing that explanation, we are also giving you skepticism because you have been able to dig a little bit. The other part where you get skepticism is when you challenge. Yeah, when you challenge, but again, when you challenge, you are going to mention what kind of information has been given to you and it leads you to a different direction. Or even when you identify missing information and therefore you can say, therefore we cannot decide on this in this way. Acumen is more about business acumen. It relates a lot to plausibility, or what we would call business common sense. A simple one is, if NPV is positive, business common sense says you can do it. So when you get a student say NPV is positive, don't do, or NPV is negative, do the project, that's not very commercially active. The acumen is not there. Yeah. So acumen is in relation to the logic of business. I mean, that's the simplest way I can explain it. Yeah, the logic of business. So don't go against the logic of business. Recommendations are practical and plausible. Yeah. So wherever you're using business logic to explain something, whether you're being reasonable, yeah, we will give you commercial acumen. Sometimes we give it a bit more easily than you expect. Okay. So for section B in the APM exam, each question can earn a maximum of 5 marks, professional marks. Communication will not be a professional skill tested in section B. It is also possible that one of the 2 questions in section B does not test skepticism. It's possible. Yeah, it's possible. This means that all questions from section A and B will test the professional skills of analysis and evaluation. So analysis and evaluation, commercial acumen, every question will have. Yeah, communication, only question 1. Skepticism can be in all 3 questions, but it will definitely be in question 1. but it may not be in both of question 2 and 3. So that's professional marks. So this is a mock exam. I always use this September 2022 exam. It's the first one which has a professional exam, the professional skills marks. But what I want to do first is to do this one, which has calculation, which is badly done all the time, which is this assignment, yeah, of this question called MAT. Yeah. Right, so the following exhibits are available on the left-hand side of the screen. Normally for me, I'll put it below. In the exam, it will be on the left-hand side. Provide information relevant to the question. So there's company information, including background, industry, and operational information of the company. Variance analysis, details of work relating to the operating statement for MEDI. Budgeting, a request for work relating to the budgeting process. And finally, there is Appendix 1, which is information collected by the finance director. The information should be used to answer the question requirements within your chosen response option, meaning that means either you use Excel, spreadsheet, or Word. 2 questions, 15 marks for doing variance analysis and 5 marks for budgeting. Again, as you see, respond to the FD or MEDI's request for work on the following areas, but what is exactly to be done can only be found when you read the scenario. And there are 5 marks, professional marks. Okay. Company information is always a background information, so you must always make sure you read this well. You can go a bit faster on this, yeah, but the one that you have to slow down is the exhibit that comes after that, yeah. But you will also see we can go faster, but we may have to read it a second or third time later on during the exam. MEDI, manufacturing, is a company manufactures clothes on contract for well-known fashion brands. The brands do all the design and marketing work, and MEDI operates on contracts which last between 3 and 5 years. Competition is fierce for such business, and MEDI has prospered by being a cost leader. And recently in the ABC question also, yeah, we will try to do over the next weekend, this concept of being a cost leader came out also. Yeah, so has prospered by being a cost leader while still able to meet the required quality standards imposed by the contracts. MEDI aims to optimize returns to its shareholders, and the board has been under pressure to increase these returns recently in order to meet its shareholder imposed targets. So it's very interesting to note that shareholders are very insistent, sort of, because they impose on certain targets. And the targets are mostly in terms of returns to shareholders. Each production contract is treated separately with a production manager assigned to handle the aspects of production, while purchasing, contract negotiation, and the supporting activities, which means human resource and finance, are managed in MEDI's head office function. Yeah. So production manager, any aspect related to production they handle. Unfortunately, it means that purchasing of raw materials is not handled by the production manager. Contract negotiation is not, and supporting activities also are not. So there is a certain lack of control by the production manager on a number of aspects. Performance of a contract and the production manager responsible for it are assessed through the budget and variances. The budget is prepared with input from the production managers using absorption costing and standard cost. And the board on MEDI believes that the bottom-up, they believe it's a bottom-up process, captures the relevant information for its purposes, and it then has the final decision on the budget. Right, so this is more of generally what's happening. Now, specifically, for the variance analysis part, the finance director has been busy preparing a bid for a new contract, and so has asked you to do some routine work for him in preparation for an upcoming monthly board meeting. The work involves looking at issues arising from variance analysis that is usually presented with the operating statement to the board at such meetings, and the production manager's performance is assessed based on this operating statement produced under absorption cost. The FD needs you to consider these areas which are causing him concern and all seem to have arisen on the contract. So this is only one contract for the Farlery fashion brand. The FD has collected information in Appendix 1 that he believes outlines the problems. The FD has asked you to perform relevant variance calculations, yeah, and then evaluate the results in light of the comments from the production manager who handles all aspects of production on the FF contract. So there are two things. One is calculations. And secondly, once you have done your calculation, you have to evaluate the results in light of the comments from the production manager who handles all aspects. So there are two things to be done. So even if you don't get the variance calculation right, you can still do the evaluation of the results based on what you have obtained. Yeah, of course, it might not be very easy in the sense that the comment may not align very well with the results of the calculation. That's the only. Then obviously you will know you have done something wrong, but again you will have to carry on. Yeah. Exhibit 3 is on budgeting. FD is concerned that the production manager's comments on the budgeting process given in Appendix 1 and how they conflict with the view of the board, which sees the process as inclusive of the manager's views. Therefore, he wants you to evaluate whether the budgeting process is bottom up. Very straightforward question. Evaluate is an evaluation. So whether the budgeting process is bottom up. Yeah. So there are two evaluations here. The evaluation whether it's bottom up is very much a PR approach question. The evaluation of the results is in relation to the variance calculation. You can consider the variance calculation to be the R already. Yeah. And then the P will most probably be the comment. And then the E is you make based on what comment you found. And based on the calculation, you put the E in between. So here, this evaluation is easier than this evaluation. Because simply this evaluation, we already have done the R earlier. Now, this information this is where we're getting quite a bit of information. And it's not in a form of table. But remember, it doesn't mean that when we give information from our table, the student do better. There is no clear better improvement in performance. FF had estimated that it would need between 25,000 and 30,000 shirts. And MEDI had estimated they would achieve a profit margin of $5.50 per shirt. The budget for MEDI was set at the upper limit of 30,000 shirts, but in fact only 25,500 units. Very clear. Yeah, was set at the upper limit. Why do you want to set at an upper limit? It's not fair. You know that the minimum you will sell is 25, the maximum is 30. So why do you use 30,000 when this is the maximum? It's being unfair. You're setting an unfair target. But in fact, only 25,500 units were manufactured. So we were closer to the lower limit. The actual profit margin was $5. So they had expected $5.50, $5. So what seems to be happening in these companies already, from here you can see, is when they set targets, they tend to set the targets at a level which is high. And that, for part B, already indicates that perhaps the bottom up is not really bottom up. So we'll have to see. Let's continue. The movement in profit margin has been driven by material price and labor efficiency changes only. Now, obviously, if profit margin was 550 and it's now 5, it must be that material price and labor efficiency have deteriorated. Yeah, or both. Material for these shirts was estimated to cost $30 per shirt based on assumed price inflation of 3%. But due to worldwide price inflation, this cost had risen to $31. So one of the problems is the increase in the cost of material, which has gone up. It was assumed to cost $30 with inflation of 3%. But due to worldwide price inflation, now, price inflation worldwide is not something the company can control. So therefore, this price of 31 seems to be something that the company could not anticipate and cannot control. When the material was purchased, there were no problems with material wastage in production. So as far as the production managers work, there's no problem. Yeah, so in other words, usage is good. Yeah, remember in material, we have two variants, price and usage. The budgeted time needed to complete a shirt was 1 hour, and actual labor hours was 25,140. You can quickly divide 25,140. We produce 25,500, so it's slightly better efficiency because 25,140 is supposed to use 1 hour. So we should use 25,140. Sorry, we made 25,500 shirts, so we should have used 25,500 hours but we use 25/140. Straight away, with our calculator, you can already see there seems to be a favorable efficiency variance. Actual labor rates match the standard labor rate, so there is no labor rate variance due to a long-standing agreement with the labor unions and MIPS. Already you can see. So no usage variance, no usage variance, just a price variance. And that also, it seems we cannot control it. And then there is a labor efficiency variance, which seems to be positive. Yeah. While we don't have a labor rate variance. So how difficult can it be then? Yeah. Production managers' comments relating to the FF contract. I find the whole process of budgeting to be difficult. The minute the examiner is using word difficult, is already hinting that the production manager is not very happy with the way it's happening. All the production managers are asked for input when setting the budget, but little notice seems to be taken our advice. It's so clear. Yeah. So we are asked for our input, but they're not taking notice of it. So what kind of bottom-up is this? For example, it was obvious that material costs were going up, as we have read. Generally in the economy, we're already seeing rises of 6% at the time when the budget was set. So when the time the budget was set, the material had already increased by 6%. But then they still did not seem to adjust. However, the budget decision makers decided on an optimistic view of material prices. You cannot do that. The market is going up. How can you still feel that the market will give you a better price? They also took an optimistic view on predicted volumes for the contract. Nevertheless, this was offset by our success in beating the predicted learning curve for manufacturing these new line options. And that is commendable. That is their work. The production managers are proud that year on year, we have managed to achieve a 1% outperformance of the budget in this regard. Yeah, so based on learning, they have been able to always beat the budget by 1%. Now, to be fair, this outperformance also seems not to have been included in the budget. Okay. So the first question is they want us to calculate variances. We know there are only two variances to calculate. One is the variance on price. And that variance of price is because of the inflation. And so it will be a planning variance. And you have to remember, because planning variance which we cannot control. The standard is changing. Yeah. And for the labor efficiency, yeah, it is clearly an operational variance, except that at the bottom there, we have to be able to see this 1% outperformance should have been included. So it might turn out to be also a planning variance, which means that we should have incorporated it into the budget. Okay. So I'm opening the answers that I have worked already. Yeah. So I'm not going to, because we're going to run out of time doing this otherwise. So the variance analysis of FD has asked you, the FD has asked you to perform relevant variance calculations and then evaluate the results in light of the comments from the production manager who handles all aspects of production and the FF contract. And what we see is, first of all, there's a sales volume variance because remember the budgeted sales volume was 30,000. Remember they put it at the upper limit, but we only sold 25,500. And the standard profit margin, which was shown to us, or this has opened a different program. Okay. Which one is here? Yeah. The original profit margin is 550. So for a quick revision, when you do sales volume variance is actual sales quantity minus the sales quantity multiplied by standard normally contribution. If you're using marginal costing. If company is using absorption costing, they multiply by standard profit margin. Do not mention multiply by actual profit because this is what we expected 550. So unfortunately, since we sold less, it will be adverse. We sold 4,500 units less. So we had expected $5.50. So we'll be short in terms of profit. This is profit margin. So this is in terms of profit, $24,750 adverse sales volume variance. Right? Yeah. Now the materials price variance, again, quick revision, is selling price minus actual price multiplied by actual quantity. We won't do it because this was already saved earlier. I should have already corrected it that time. Selling price, standard price, we were expecting to pay standard price of, as you can see here, $30. But the actual price had risen to $31. So therefore, 30 minus 31, 25,500. Now, that is a total variance. Okay, now we need to adjust and separate it into operational and planning. Original standard price is $30, is original standard price of $30 here. So there is no issue here. Actual is 31, which we have already used. But then we were told that the inflation at that time, this is further down. For example, it was obvious that material costs were going up generally in the economy. And we were already, the word is already, at the time of preparing budget, they already had seen that material costs had increased by 6% at the time when the budget was set. However, the budget decision maker decided on an optimistic view. You cannot do that. If the price externally has risen by 6%, you have to incorporate. Otherwise, what? You're expecting your purchasing manager to do magic? That's what they're expecting. And that's not fair. The reality of the situation is the price had gone up by 6%. The minimum you should do, I mean, you could have said more than that, but the minimum you should do is adjust the standard price by 6%. And so if you adjust the standard price by 6%, that will be $30 divided by 1.03 times 1.06. Well, the final one was, hang on. There. So material position was estimated to cost $30 based on assumed inflation of 3%. But due to worldwide prices, there was already an assumption of 3%. But actually, the assumption should have been 6%. So that means in the $30, there is already 3%. So that's why by dividing by 1.03, I'm removing the original assumption. And then I'm now adding 6%, which is a new assumption. So basically, I'm changing the assumption. So what we saw students do is just take 30 times 1.06. So many students do, well, you get the variance wrong, but at least your comments will be correct. So this is a very good example. If you take 30 by 1.06, you will get, get 3180, right? 30 times 1.06, you get 3180. Yeah. So if you get 3180, then what happens is the operational material variance will be favorable. So your comment will change, but the calculation, we will not give you the marks. And the calculation marks you won't get for this, for the operational material variance. But the comment, when you go and comment, based on how you comment based on your figures, will still give you the marks for the comment. And this is a very good point. Yeah, but in reality, the price go up to 30.874 because in the $30, there was already 3% inflation. So you must divide by 3%, 1.03 to remove the 3% inflation and then re-inflate at 6%, 30.874. So this was a big mistake. Huh? So planning material price variance, it should be $30 originally. It went up to 30.874, and we have used 25,500. So it is adverse 22,282 when you multiply. On the other hand, the operational variance is also adverse. You should have been able to buy 30.874. The price actually went up $31. So that's also adverse. So both are adverse. Total also is adverse. Labor efficiency now. Labor efficiency for revision is always standard hours minus actual hours times standard rate. Standard hours, 25,500. How do I get it? Because they said to us initially in the question that one shirt should take 1 hour. The budgeted time needed to complete a shirt was 1 hour. So that will be the standard time also. So at standard, it should take 25,500 hours. But then we were told that they only use 25,140 hours. So it would seem, therefore, that we have a nice favorable variance of 460 hours. We work faster by 460 hours times 15 hours is 5,004. However, we must be fair to recognize that at the bottom of the page, it says the production managers at MIDI are proud that year on year we have managed to achieve a 1% outperformance of the budget in this year. Meaning that when they put this 1 hour, remember this is a new contract, a new shirt, they should have considered that they will be able to do it 1% faster. And they did not include it. They did not include the 1% faster. So therefore, they should not have planned for 1 hour. They should have planned for 0.99 hours, 1% faster. Because they have, the managers themselves said, in the past, every year, we have been able to achieve a 1% outperformance of the budget in this year. And the regard is in the sense that if it's a new product, the learning curve will allow them to learn faster and therefore reduce the time. And so management refused to acknowledge this. They refuse to acknowledge this, which is also sad. So if we recalculate, we then get 0.99 hours instead of 1 hour. So we should get a labor efficiency planning variance, which is 3825 favorable. So the whole 5,004 is not basically due to the current efforts. The current efforts is 25,140 divided by 25,000. They took 0.98588 hours. So they learn even faster. So this is also favorable. 25,500 times 0.99 minus 25,140. You work in total. You don't use this 0.98588. You get 105 hours on top of the efficiency planning times 15, 157. So the 1575 is considered operational. That will be considered controllable by the manager. While the 3825, we won't put it to the manager. Yeah. So these calculations and evaluation are worth a total of 15 marks. Let's do the evaluation. Let's read the evaluation. Yeah, we can do the budgeting comment later on if you want. Okay. Any question? Yeah, online. If you have any question, please ask.
No, sir. Right now, I think everything is okay.
All right. So we carry on with the evaluation of these figures. Okay. So now we have specifically what they ask us to do is, therefore, he wants you to evaluate whether the, no, sorry, this part. So perform relevant calculations. We've done that. Yeah. Let me see whether I put the marks. I had the document where I had the marks. Maybe I did not include it. Hold on, yeah, I want to tell you how many marks we have. Right, so the way they are giving marks, so they say they are giving so there is 1 mark for the sales volume variance. There's 1 mark for the material price variance. That is the traditional variance, 25,500. Then, so if you do not do the planning, you still get 1 mark. Yeah, but if you have done the planning, yeah, then you'll get 1 mark here and 1 mark here for the operational and the planning variance. Okay, but they are also willing to give 1 mark for this one, for the revised standard price 1 mark. So you can get up to 4 marks for this. Not bad, isn't it? Except that many students forget their PM, so they don't do well. Yeah. So again, easy marks gone. Yeah. And then the material price was easy. Okay. For the labor efficiency, yes, to incorporate the learning curve was something that majority did not do. But again, the marking is very nice because you get 1 mark here again. So minimum, if someone did not do operational and planning variance, minimum, if they at least do the sales volume, the normal material price here, this one, the 25,500, the 24,750, and at least the 5,400, you still end up with 3 marks. I mean, yeah, it's not enough for you to pass, but at least you get marks. My point is, calculation marks are always there for you to take. You just don't get it because you just don't attempt. Yeah, you get nothing because you don't attempt. Because if you do attempt, you will get some of these marks. So there is 1 mark for this one here, again, 1 mark for this one here, and again, 1 mark for the revised material time of 0.99 hour. So 4 marks for labor efficiency variance, 4 marks for material price variance, 8, 1 mark for sales volume variance. So 9 marks in total for calculations, which is extremely good. Yeah, because in total, the question had 15 marks. Yeah, so out of 15 marks, 9 for calculations, and then 6 marks for you to do the evaluation of the variance analysis. And this evaluation is not as difficult because it is very much still in line with what we have obtained, what we have done in PM. Now, in the evaluation marks also, there are 2 sections. So the 6 marks evaluation, you get 3 marks for just general comments. General comments on planning and operational variances and their application and their use in this scenario here and their use here. So if you can generally explain why they should use it, you know, that the prices are changing, that it makes sense to do it just generally like that. But within the context of the scenario, you get 3 marks. And specific evaluation of the 3 variances. So another 3 marks, 1 for specifically about the sales variance, 1 specifically about the material price, and 1 specifically about the labor. You see how it's broken down nicely. So even if you don't do all of it, you can still get a good marks as long as you know how to do the calculations. Yeah. Okay. No additional marks apart from this. So what I put in is okay, just an assignment question. So let's put the comments and then we can do the budgeting after lunch. So the evaluation planning variances are those that arise due to inaccurate forecasts or standards in the original budget. Very general. Yeah. Operational variances are then the remainder due to the decisions of operational managers. A planning variance is the difference between the original standard and a revised one set with the benefit of hindsight. And an operational variance is the difference between the revised standard and the actual performance. Generally, one must be careful in applying such revisions to budgets, as the conditions for the revision must have been fairly apparent at the budget setting time. Because if we, and in this case, it was for the price. So you can see this is a general explanation of planning variances and operational variances. But why is it, you might say, but it's general and it's an explanation, why are they giving marks? Reason being, when they ask you at this level to do evaluation, did they tell you, when they said here, perform relevant variance calculation? Now, only the student who is well prepared will know, oh, I can, based on the data, I can also do planning and operational. Yeah, because we have students who just did the first three variances: the sales volume total, the material price total, and the labor efficiency. That's it. And then they don't break down further. So that means there are additional relevant variance calculations to be done, but they did not do. You understand that? That's why for a student who has understanding and the students explain what is going on here in terms of breaking down the planning and operational and planning, we are willing to give marks. Because we did not ask you to explain this. Sorry, we did not ask you to calculate the planning and operational. So the student who is calculating is then explaining more or less what is going on. And that's why we give marks. Yeah. Then the budget, now the explanation specifically about the variance. The budget for sales volume was set at the upper limit at what the customer expected to buy. Isn't it? 30,000. A more reasonable estimate might have been in the middle of the volume range given by the customer, which would have been 27,500 shirts, 30 plus 25 divided by 2. And would have cut the variance in the budget by 13,750. You don't have to say that if you don't want to. This would have led to a more realistic budget and so better overall planning for MEDI. The variance is mainly out of the control of MEDI as it depends on the volume purchased by FF. The only way to mitigate this risk would be by stipulating a minimum order quantity in the contract. You don't have to go that far, but this is just making a comment in relation to how would you be able to minimize this variance. Material price and labor are more in the control of MEDI and have been analyzed into planning operational variances in order to see the effect of budgeting choices and operational actions. The degree to which the production manager can affect the budgets is dealt with later. So you have to be very careful here that you don't go into this bottom up and top down. Because once you go into it, you're answering part 2 already. So that's why we say it's dealt with later, or you don't say anything. You just move on. Explain material price variance is affected by the choice to make an optimistic estimation of inflation. Production manager was really seeing price rises of 6%, which is from the case this one, at budget setting. And so it seems reasonable to attribute that as a planning error and so to revise the budget. So what we are doing, we're explaining why we are adjusted by 6%. Labor efficiency shows a small favorable variance, but again illustrates weakness in the budget setting process. The production manager has indicated that there is a consistent 1% favorable variance on labor efficiency, which should have been taken into account in order to obtain a more accurate budget. If you know, and they have told you, every year they are improving by 1%. There's a sort of continuous improvement going on here, a sort of Kaizen going on here. You can even mention, you don't have to explain what is Kaizen. Knowledge is taken for granted. But you can say, it suggests that the budget setting process is not being improved by learning from previous mistakes. So here, what is not being improved? They are improving in production. What is not improved is the budget setting process. The budget setting process is the one that's not improving by learning from previous mistakes. In this instance, the learning curve factors may not be properly updated based on past performance. The production manager's criticism of the budget is borne out by the variance analysis above. The production manager is motivated in this criticism as they will be assessed on performance against budget. The above analysis shows, however, that their performance is being assessed on areas that they cannot control. That's it. You don't have to say more. Yeah? But if you think about it, this question is totally within the capacity of a PM student to do. Don't have to do APM to do this. Of course, the comments are a bit more advanced. Yeah, but a PM student would have made more or less most of these comments on planning and operational variances. So again, we find a situation where what's happening more recently is that one of the questions in section B tend to be a bit more basic with a bit more calculations, which we have learned from PM. And again, APM students are not able to do. Recently, in June 25 now, March 25, we had this problem of the ABC question, which had a lot of marks on calculation and students could not do. Simply could not do. We read the comment just now. Examiner is very angry. Yeah. Yeah, to say the least. Yeah, examiner is very angry. Yeah, because he decided, okay, I'm going to ask, this is the one. This is the one here, the question 2 on ABC. Yeah, so candidates appear to find the discussions quite challenging. Afterwards, we have not next weekend, we do this question, then we can come back to this comment. All right, we have an afternoon class. We stop here, so I don't push you too hard. So in the afternoon, we'll continue with this part B of this MIDI, and then we will do this September 2022. Okay, September 2022 is the one I put in the mock exam for those students attending. Yeah, so we stop here for morning class. We'll continue at 2 p.m. Now remember, revision class are a bit longer, so they're full 3 hours with 15 minutes break, which means that we will start 2 o'clock. We'll give a break of 15 minutes, but we'll end at 5:15. Okay. All right. That's it for morning. I'll see you later in the afternoon now.
Okay.